Jaron Jarvis Channel, Top 20 Scary Stories of the Day from Reddit nosleep. 2018-08-20. Story 1, Hair. Trichotillomania. A mouthful of a name for the compulsion to pull out your own hair. All hair, the hair on your head, arms, your eyelashes, eyebrows. Lots of people have it. It's usually paired with anxiety and other lovely issues. Mine got worse when I felt anxious. My fingers would just curl up in my hair and I'd pluck a strand out. Then another one. And another one. During high school I'd beg the principal to allow me to wear a hat to school so no one could see the bald patches, but he told me just stop pulling out your hair. Needless to say, I got picked on. A lot. I suppose it was a learned habit though. My mother pulled out her hair too. I was raised only by my mother, but that didn't mean we were close. She was a mousy woman who never went out, only to work at the salon and to pick up some groceries. When I was 12, she started giving me the money so I could handle that. My mom's trichotillomania was much worse. Her arms were bald and she had no eyebrows. Her head was covered in bald patches that looked irritated and sore from where she picked at the exposed skin. When she went out, she did have the luxury to be allowed to wear a hat. People tried to get her help, I think. But as far as I know, she never pursued help. Her obsession with hair went farther though. When I pulled my hair out, I just wad it up in a ball and toss it. Not my mother. In the living room as we'd watch TV, her fingers would curl into what little hair she had and pluck. Out came a strand. She'd set it across her lap, run her finger along it, before her hand went right back to her hair. Pluck. 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 Pretty soon she'd have several dozen hairs stretched across her lap. She'd stroke them, ever so softly, before pulling out more. At the end of whatever movie or show we'd watch, she'd go down to the basement. At the time, I had no idea what she was doing with the hair, but she'd come back up without it and get to work on dinner. My friends hated coming to my place. They'd pull faces at my mom's balding head and were disgusted by the hair. I'd gotten used to picking out hair from my sandwiches and stews, but one time my friend found a long strand of hair in her spaghetti and screamed before she ran to the bathroom to throw up. She refused to come to my house after that. I'd grown ashamed of my mother and her compulsion, I'll admit, but it didn't stop me from pulling out my own. When I got to be 18 I moved out with a few other students. We weren't friends at the time, but I was the only one with a car, so they let me stay with them. I learned to stem the habit when I was away from my mother, and after one of my roommates suggested I cut my hair I went the extra mile and shaved it all off. A strange style for a woman, maybe, but it stopped me from pulling it out. At times I'd find myself tugging at the hair on my arms, but that wasn't nearly as strong a desire, more like an itch rather than a need. The next time I saw my mother I was 24 years old. She hadn't attempted to call, or message me on Facebook, hell I didn't get even so much as a text from her. It was hurtful, maybe, but I figured that's just how it was going to be. Then one day I found myself turning onto her street. We'd only lived maybe half an hour or so apart, but I'd never bothered to go visit. She never invited me after all, but today I felt different. Someone needed to check up on her, after all. When I got up to the front door I thought the window was covered in cobwebs at first. When I managed to get the door open, I heard the several familiar snaps. Hair. I forced the door open to the hair web of my mother. It was the only real way to describe it, a web. Strands of hair had been woven together, over everything in the house. I covered my mouth to stop from inhaling the musty scent. God, had my absence made my mother's compulsion grow out of control? Half tempted to call the police, I walked past the hall into the kitchen, where a similar sight of woven hair greeted me. It appeared that these hairs were woven first, they were starting to crumble and seemed more like efficient tangles rather than the smooth plaiting that concealed the couch. Where the hell was my mother? I heard something clank downstairs. Let it be clear, as a child my mother always made clear I wasn't allowed down there. She said the stairs were steep and I could break my neck. As a teenager I didn't want to go down there. It was dark and smelled bad. But curiosity got the better of me, that and the possibility that my mother could be injured down there. So I walked to the door. It had been entirely taken over by hair. I ended up having to take a pair of scissors from the kitchen to cut my way open. The basement was dark, and the moment I set my hand on the banister to steady myself I felt it. Hair. Even more hair. But this wasn't my mother's hair. See, I should have put it together when I was upstairs that my mother had fine, brittle brown hair. The hair upstairs varied from blonde to black. And the hair I rested my hand on was thick. I could almost imagine the locks of curls that had been stretched out to weave together. Feeling dread seep into every pore, I walked into the basement. It was a maze of darkness. I could only feel my way through twisting walls of hair. I could feel textures, coarse, fine, curly, thick, frizzy. Had she stolen it from work? Then I turned to a room only lit by a dim desk lamp. A woman was strapped to the chair, and I took notice of her luxurious and long red hair. She was unconscious. I heard the buzz of a razor. And I saw a pair of hands extend from the darkness to stroke that lovely red hair. I screamed and ran from the house. I ripped through so much hair, tore down all the sheets of it that I could. I was trapped for God knows how long. I finally reached the kitchen and went out the back door, ripping away locks of dyed green and pink hair that had it tied closed. Apparently you look like a crazy person when you run down the street, covered in enough hair to make a whole new person and screaming your head off. Someone called the cops and I was lugged in for questioning. Someone had been going around and kidnapping people, returning them after 3 days physical unharmed save a few nicks, but telling stories of a dark basement and someone stroking their hair and complimenting it before shaving it all off. I was partially relieved my mother hadn't become a serial killer, but the worst problem was when the police searched the house. They hadn't found my mother, but they did find a tunnel that led into the ground, covered by a mass of hair so thick they had to burn it in order to get through. Story 2, Something is wearing my boyfriend's skin. I know because I killed him and now he's back. I know confessing to murdering one's boyfriend on a popular site like Reddit isn't a smart thing to do, but to all the world my boyfriend is alive and well. But I promise you, it isn't him. I know because I killed him a week ago. Sam and I have been together since we were freshmen in high school. He was sweet, smart, and talented. His photographs were truly special, and even won many competitions. He got a full scholarship for baseball, multi-talented. We were able to get into the same school, and rented a tiny apartment just a few blocks from campus, and everything seemed perfect. Like a movie. But just last year things changed. Sam began going out with clients he was supposed to be photographing. They drank and stayed out all night. When I would confront him about it he would assure me it was making a name for himself. He was just being friendly, and it would help to get more clients. This was a good thing. I just couldn't see that. And he wouldn't drink so much. Lies. He was getting better and better at that. It wasn't long before he was missing classes, and failing tests. He lost his scholarship after coming into class, the wrong class, hungover and punching the teacher when he was asked to leave. Of course his photos suffered too. They were blurry and off-center. Most looked like they came from a 1-hour photo lab. Sam started losing clients, then he sold his equipment, including a camera I had bought him that took 3 years to pay off. He didn't shower regularly, and spent every night glued to the couch, playing video games and cussing out 13-year-old kids through his headset. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. He refused to get a job, and didn't care about school any longer. He avoided any calls from his only family, his mother and sister. He slept all day too. I didn't want to kill him. It's not like I planned on it. I wanted to help him in all honesty. I wasn't in love anymore, but I grieved the man he was. The man I lost. One night I went to bed angry, again, and tried going to bed while he played his game. I was woken by a heavy feeling on my chest. I opened my eyes and saw Sam sitting on me, holding my arms against the bed. I was confused. Angry. I demanded to know what he was doing. I could smell the booze on his breath. His eyes were bloodshot. He tried to kiss me, something we hadn't done in months. I jerked away from him and he snapped. He started screaming in my face, accusing me of cheating on him. I tried to get free, while telling him I'd never cheated. He called me awful names. Told me I was the cause for losing his job and scholarship. I was so mad I snapped and told him everything I had thought of him. How lazy he was. How everything he lost was due to his behavior. That I was tired of taking care of him. And that he just lost me too. Just as the last word left my lips, I felt a searing pain in my cheek. I could taste blood in my mouth. When the fog cleared, I saw Sam staring down at me, a twisted smile on his face. He grabbed me by the throat and warned me never to talk to him like that ever again. I know what you're thinking. I tried to leave. I went to stay with a friend. But he called all hours of the night. He even called her landlord and reported her cat. It was ridiculous. I went back because I had nowhere else. My father wasn't well and Mom was taking care of him. She didn't need the extra worry of my problems. I didn't want to push my issues on anyone else. I could handle it, I thought. I tried to reason with him. I told him we were over. But I would stay and pay half the rent until we could afford to move on our own. He just laughed, and said, "You're not leaving me." He had laughed when he said it, but his eyes were cold and I knew he meant it. What happened to him? The night he died I came home from work and found him drinking cheap whiskey straight from the bottle. He was sitting on the couch in the pitch-black living room. I could tell something was wrong. His face was sweaty, and his eyes narrowed on me, gritting his teeth so hard I thought his jaw would crack. I opened my mouth to ask him what was wrong, but before I could the nearly empty whiskey bottle flew by me, shattering against the wall just inches beside my head. I won't go into all the ugly details now. They're not important. He flew into a rage and hitting me and choking me, all because the electricity was shut off. Hard to pay the bills when you're paying it all alone, and your boyfriend takes money for alcohol and video games. I thought he was going to kill me, and he might have. But in the process of being thrown around, my purse had emptied, its contents strewn along the carpet. The knife Sam had given me when we were in high school, for protection ironically, lay just within reach of me. He took a momentary break from choking me, tired himself out I assume, and I took my chance. Even now I don't know if I really thought about what I was going to do. It was just automatic. It was as if the knife appeared in my hand and the next thing I knew the blade was in his throat. Warm blood covered my hand and poured onto my chest. I still remember his face. The sheer surprise. He struggled to breathe, and toppled over, gasping and pawing at the knife. Our eyes locked, and there was pure hatred there. I passed out then. When I came to, he was gone. There was no knife, no Sam. All that remained of what happened was the broken bottle and a small red stain on the carpet. At first I was scared. Really scared. I didn't know what to do. I fought with going to the police and just staying quiet. I mean, what would I tell them? I killed my boyfriend, but I don't know where he is. A dead person can't just get up and walk away. It was 4 days before he came, the Sam that's not Sam. I was sitting on the couch, trying to study. The door opened and there he was. Just standing in the doorway, smiling. He was even wearing the same dark blue t-shirt, and jeans. The same thing he was wearing the night I plunged the knife in his throat. I tried to scream. But I was frozen with shock. He walked toward me, one hand behind his back. "These are for you," he said, holding a bouquet of roses. I just looked at him, my heart racing. "What's the matter?" he asked, looking genuinely worried. Where were you?" I somehow managed to say. "I was at my mother's for a few days. I knew we have been having some problems since I got kicked out of school and lost my job. We haven't exactly been happy. So I thought I'd give you some space," he said, laying the roses on my lap. "You look pale. Have you been sick?" I nodded slowly, my head spinning. Had I imagined the whole thing? Did I not stab him as deeply as I thought? No. I felt the blade sink into his flesh. I saw the blade disappear into his throat, leaving only the handle exposed. "I love you," And I missed you. I promise things will be a lot different. He told me, wrapping me into a tight hug. Days passed, and Sam was just as sweet as can be. He no longer played with his video games, didn't drink, and even enrolled into a community college. He was taking pictures again too. It was as if the entire 7 months never took place. Certainly not the murder. He was romantic and tried to spend all his free time doing all the things we used to. But though I went along with it, part of me knew it was wrong. Even though friends, his mother, and sister didn't notice, I did. First there was his hair. The brown was a shade lighter than it was before, and the sides were a bit longer. That may not seem like it means anything, but how could hair grow that fast in a few days? That wasn't all. His eyes. They were a pretty green with brown and gold flecks. But now, they were brown with gold flecks. You may say that I was just confused. Or that his eyes changed as some do. But there was the scar on his left index finger. He had gotten it when he was 16 and he was bit by his uncle's dog. He had to get 8 stitches. The scar was a bright white, just above his cuticle. And while the scar is still there, it's on his ring finger on his right hand. Just subtle differences, but differences nonetheless. And he was acting too perfect. He no longer cussed, or yelled, but he also stopped eating meat. He decided to go vegan. Something Sam would never do. Sam loved meat. He never mentioned what happened. Never mentioned the knife. You may think I lucked out. But what I know, this thing is not Sam. And if that's true, then why did he take over Sam's life? He goes places at night. I caught him one night when the neighbor's dog woke me up. I rolled over to see Sam was gone. I heard the dog barking like crazy, then it was cut off, a faint cry, then silence. I got up and pressed my head against the wall listening. I could hear what sounded like someone squishing grapes. It was a nauseating sound. A few minutes later I heard sounds of footsteps. Someone moving around in the neighbor's apartment. I listened for a long time but heard nothing else. Then my bedroom door opened, and Sam crept through, slightly out of breath. When he saw me, I could see his eyes go wide for just a second, then he smiled. "You're up. I hoped I didn't wake you when I left," he said, undressing into his boxers. "Where did you go?" I asked. I was nervous but did my best to hide it. "I went for a run. It feels great out tonight. Nice and crisp. I love autumn," he said, and flooped next to me. "The neighbor's dog was barking," I said. He shrugged, "and they have had so many warning from management. I'm surprised they haven't been evicted yet," he said. It was true. The neighbors, a middle-aged couple that were always rescuing animals to rehome, were always getting complaints from neighbors about the barking, and the smell that was clearly caused by dogs that weren't housebroken. But they seemed nice, and paid rent on time, so they stayed. "Did you see anything strange when you came back?" I asked, thinking of the noises I'd heard through the wall. "Nope." "Why?" he asked, looking at me innocently. "Just wondering. I thought I heard someone over there, after the dog stopped barking," I said. He chuckled. "Probably our neighbors. Get some sleep. Hopefully their dog stays quiet." Then he put his arm over his eyes and went to sleep. I lay there wide awake, thinking of the wet and squishy noises. The sound of the dog's cry that went silent too fast. And of course, the fact that Sam never slept on his back. It was at his sister's party yesterday that my concerns went from strange to terrifying. Sam's sister Beth and her fiancé had a small party in their new house. Sam was energetic and outgoing and of course, didn't drink. Beth told me how happy she was that Sam was back to normal. I just faked a smile. How couldn't she see this thing wasn't Sam? I thought she would notice when after dinner, Sam started juggling some oranges. Something Sam couldn't do. But no. They all clapped and laughed along. Later, Beth was talking about a trip to Disney World when they were kids. "Remember the trip to Disney? Goofy?" she asked, laughing. Sam pretended to think, then smiled that fake smile I have come to know, and said, "Oh yeah, that was awesome." I got a high five. "But you know, I'd love to go back someday." He tried to change the subject, but I could see Beth frowning. She knew something wasn't right. "Wait, you don't remember what happened?" she said. Sam looked at her, and I swear I saw a flash of anger across his face. He quickly covered it with a grin. "It was a long time ago, Beth," he said. "You were so scared you puked. Right there on Goofy's shoes," she said. "Oh, I totally forgot that. Yeah, you're right." Goofy was pissed. He ran off shaking his head. And he started laughing at a memory he couldn't place. Because it wasn't his memory. When we were about to leave, Beth pulled me aside. She looked worried. "Sam's acting strange. Is he okay?" she whispered. I almost blurted it all out right then, but instead I said, "I think so." "Why?" "It's just the Disney thing," she said, biting her lip. Her fiancé Mark came up behind her, rubbing her shoulders. "People forget things, Bethy. You guys were kids." Mark said. "It's not that he forgot. He never went to Disney. He got sick and had to stay home with my grandmother. He wanted me to get an autograph from Goofy, but I forgot, so I forged it. I ended up telling him when I was mad one day, and he was so upset. So that he would forget it, and even more so that he would pretend to remember something I made up." She said. "Do you?" she started, but was cut off when Sam walked in. We said goodbye, and left, Beth watching from her front porch, that confused expression still on her face. When we got home, police were everywhere. They were standing guard at the entrance to the complex, and we had to show ID to get in. Our floor was swarming with cops, and yellow tape was blocking our neighbor's door. I asked one of the cops what happened, but he told me to move along. I tried to get a look at the neighbor's apartment, but there were too many cops blocking my view. Funny thing is, Sam never even turned his head toward the neighbor's apartment. "What happened over there?" I said. "Once inside our apartment. Probably got evicted." "Finally," he said, then to the shower. "Last night I saw it on the news. The neighbors were missing, as was their dog. There was no more information, but you usually don't hear it all on the news. I'm sure I would find out soon anyway. So here we are. Sam is out, running again. I don't care how crazy I seem, I know that isn't Sam. Whatever it is wearing his skin. It wants something, but what?" Story 3, excerpt from a diary. "I think someone is beneath my floorboards." The following is an excerpt from a diary found in a house in suburban Boston, Massachusetts. The words were blurry and the ink running because of the writer's tears. Here it is. "Day 1 finally found the perfect house, and I've just settled in. After Susan left me last month, she kicked me out of house and I just can't go back to living in an apartment. There's just something so depressing about living in an apartment after you've had the perfect house and the perfect wife. These weeks have been hard. I cry a lot. Before she left I knew I couldn't keep it together without her, and I was right. I'm a mess. Sometimes I find myself having lost time suddenly coming to and not knowing how I got here. Hopefully this lovely house will help me get through the worst of it, though." Day 2. The first night was lonely. I haven't got any furniture in here yet, just a bunch of dusty boxes and rugs, so I just slept on a blow-up mattress which was very uncomfortable. I spent hours sobbing, remembering my soft bed. I would wake up in the morning, sun shining through the window. I'd turn over and she would be there, smiling at me. Bathed in the yellow sunlight, she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, even with bed hair and no makeup. All I see when I turn over now is dust. In the last few months of our relationship, I would never get to see her like that. She was distant, cold, and we'd never have sex. I knew something was wrong, but I just couldn't face it. Then, before I knew it, she was kicking me out and I had to find a motel to stay in. Maybe moving into a new house so soon was a bad idea, but I don't really care. Also, I heard something moving in the night last night. It sounded like something was shuffling about. The weird thing is it was coming from underneath the floorboards. Probably just a rat. Day 3. I got barely any sleep. I've never been like this before. I can't deal with this. I just can't stop crying. I haven't left the house, I haven't spoken to anyone, I've barely eaten. I've only been eating junk. I stopped at a convenience store before arriving and bought some water, soda, and chips to snack on. I didn't think it would be all I was eating. Even then, I'm barely eating it at all. I raise a chip to my mouth and it takes effort to even put it in. I chew slowly, like every movement of my jaw is a task that takes great physical strength. I just can't stop thinking about her. I've sent her hundreds of texts and tried to call her, but she's blocked my number. She's blocked me on all social media. I just need to be close to her. I need to feel her being, but I just can't bring myself to leave. I keep hearing noises. I thought I heard footsteps today, but I don't think this house has a basement. I know someone can't be under my floorboards, so I just think it's my imagination. Day 4. I heard it. I heard footsteps. I think someone is beneath my floorboards. Before I didn't care, but now I'm scared. I think I'm losing my mind. I can't even remember what I've done half of the day. There are gaps in my memory. I must have just fallen asleep. God, Susan, why did you have to fucking leave? You were my everything. I can't go on without you. I need you. Day 5. I can't stop crying. I've never cried this much. Just when I think I'm going to stop, I keep crying. I think I may be insane. It happened again today. I'm losing time. It feels like I've woken up, but I'm standing up. Oh, look at my watch and I've lose an hour or two at a time. I can hear the footsteps. I thought I even heard voices, a man and a woman. I heard shuffling, whispers, and laughter. I can't do this anymore. I need to check what's down there. Day 6. I'm fucking angry. Why the fuck did she leave? She's probably already got a boyfriend. She's probably bringing him into my house, fucking him in my bed. Fucking whore. I need to make her pay. I need her to see me. I need her to see how she hurt me. She needs to see what she did. Maybe then she'll take me back. Just happened again. Lost 5 hours. Day 7. I'm still crying, but now I'm more angry. I keep losing time. Running out of food and water. The noises are driving me fucking crazy. I walked around trying to locate the noise. I moved a few boxes and found a hatch in the floorboards. There must be a basement. I'm going down there tomorrow. The noises are making me angry. Angry at Susan. Angry at that fucking bitch for what she did to me. She broke me. She fucking broke me. Fuck you, Susan. Day 8. I'm going down there. I found a curtain rod in case there is someone down there. I can feel myself slipping into another time loss. Fuck you, Susan. I love you, Susan. That is the end of the excerpt. The diary was found in the attic of a house which was the site of a double murder. The victims were one Susan North, whom the house belonged to, and her boyfriend, Kyle Smith. They were found naked and dead in the bed in the master bedroom, bludgeoned with a blunt object. The attic was found to have traces of habitation, with empty food and drink containers and human waste. The diary belonged to Susan's ex-husband, Mark, who had presumably suffered a mental breakdown, and had been squatting in the attic, possibly gaining entrance to the house before the locks were changed. Mark was found in the master bedroom's ensuite, having committed suicide with a straight razor. A friend of Susan had said that she had complained that she was hearing sobbing, but thought she was imagining it. Story 4, if you live in Florida, you may want to reconsider a healthy diet. When Tina and I went to the farmer's market in Palm Beach, Florida, it was a beautiful Sunday morning. They always set up right by the Intercoastal in a beautiful spot, so it's a bit easier to get me out shopping for vegetables. Back then I was badly overweight and I think it was one of the many things she was doing to get me into healthier living. We had been together for 5 years on that day, and I would have done anything for her, including going to a personal trainer a few times a week. I hadn't quite gotten into shape yet, however, and people, especially men, tended to stare in disbelief at my pear shape and her hourglass, my receding hairline and her long red hair. This may be one reason I wasn't happy to see Chris Edelstein, her charming and square-jawed co-worker at Tim Stenson's architecture firm. He looked a little under the weather today but was no less enthusiastic as ever. He bounded up to us like a golden retriever and pushed a gigantic bag of oddly circular-shaped leafy greens into my hands. Tina. Mark. Hi. His smile was bone deep. Hey Chris. Tina beamed back. How did you manage to get up this early? Tina told me that you've been eating healthy and I wanted you to try these. I just started adding them to my smoothies last week but they are so addictive, they will make you forget about carbs instantly. He smiled deeply and put up his hand for a high five, which I awkwardly reached up to meet. Thank you. Thank you so much. It hasn't been easy avoiding bread. I didn't even realize how many things were made out of corn. Despite feeling threatened and a little embarrassed by his gift, I partially looked forward to it. Guess who can't stick around though because I got called back to the office? He hugged Tina exactly 1 second longer than I was comfortable with. Are you serious? Tina stared at him in frank disbelief. They were viciously overworked at their office on a new hospital, and their long hours did not make me any happier about their close friendship. Yeah, and Carter let me know with a text message about it this morning. Well, I hope you don't mind if I enjoy my weekend. I'm honestly thinking about looking around for something else. She wrapped her arms around me and kissed my cheek while Chris nodded enthusiastically. Hey, I've been telling you for the past year, this was a good opportunity for you. Like 7 years ago. No one stays in one place for 7 years, you'll only get what you're worth if you jump ship. He smiled with a faux scolding tone. Well, you might be right. Good luck getting out quick at least. She poked at the bag he had given me curiously. Thanks. And don't forget, Mark, you really have to try those. I got them over at the new stall. I smiled and thanked him, uncomfortable at him having mentioned my name again. Tina went straight to the source of the new vegetable, a fat, squat woman at the back of the street that had been converted into a marketplace. She was the only person without a tent, selling vegetables from large buckets outside of an RV. I was about to follow her up to the woman stationed next to the guy selling gourmet juices, all of which had kale in them. The woman was extremely short and fat, with pale, wax-like skin and long, stringy black hair. Her flesh looked extremely unhealthy, with a thick, putty-like texture that reminded me of something I had tried to make from Play-Doh once. She wore a dirty, tattered dress that hung awkwardly over her skinny limbs and barrel-like torso. Her eyes were tiny and bead-like, set deep across her broad, flat face. She clearly had some kind of deformity, like Down's syndrome, but I had never seen anyone who looked like her before. I didn't want to embarrass myself, so I just followed Tina's gregarious lead. She smiled at us with a look of incredible surprise and joy on her face. Vegetables. She said with a strange breathy slur. Good morning. Could you tell me what vegetable this is? Tina offered her a look at the bag, and the woman clapped happily. Vegetables. She insisted with joy and pushed more in the bag before giving it back with a smile that seemed almost as wide as her face. Her fingers and arms were unnaturally long, thin and strangely bony for how fat she was. Oh, thank you. Tina said and smiled to me. She didn't have any more of the strange circular leaves, which I thought was strange, but she did have sea grapes, sugar cane, peanut butter fruit, ice cream bean, pond apples, pawpaw and wild garlic, all of which are fruits that aren't popularly cultivated but are insanely delicious and either native to South Florida or the Greater Caribbean. I wondered if the leafy greens were some kind of a new health trend, because Chris was really into that stuff. Tina bought a few pieces of breadfruit for sandwiches and some sea grapes to make into jelly and thanked the woman. When we got home, Tina made a gigantic bowl of salad with the leaves and they were absolutely delicious. They tasted rich, like avocado, but had a hint of citrus, and I'll admit, I was shocked at how good they tasted. But habits are habits, and I only picked at my salad while Tina ate it ravenously. I hunted down every crouton in the bowl and tried to pair them with dressing and tomatoes, which I was more accustomed to. New things are difficult for me. Half an hour after we finished eating, Chris called her to see if she had tried the veggies yet. They babbled for at least 15 minutes. Saying that I felt threatened was a pretty serious understatement. I wondered if we had any ice cream, or a hidden piece of candy somewhere. I forced myself to eat another mouthful of the greens, partially out of some kind of desperation to save the relationship. I felt like the fact that I'd rather go hungry than eat healthy food was a bad omen. That night I remember her getting up out of bed at some point, but I just went back to sleep. The next morning, Tina was up even earlier than normal and was packing the day's prepared meals with her newfound favorite leaves and getting ready for the gym, so I rolled out of bed and got ready with her. After our workout, she jogged to the ladies' room and came out quite a bit later. She looked much worse than before. She had gone to the bathroom and casually told me that she had some workout sickness. I had never exerted myself so much that I had gotten sick and found this level of discipline amazing about her. I found a lunch filled with those leaves but told myself that the garden chicken salad sandwich on whole grain from a local fast food spot was somehow just as good even though I knew it wasn't. I dumped the delicious looking salad Tina had made for me with guilt and shame after I enjoyed the absurdly fatty sandwich. That night, after an entirely silent dinner, we went to sleep. Tina woke up at some point and left the apartment. I didn't bother bringing it up. This is pretty much how the next week and change went, until she finally had some time off again. I'm a fighter, so I tried my best to use that time to get back into this relationship. I could get past her cheating. We had planned to both take a 3-day weekend after our mutually long day on a Thursday. I rarely saw her during the week, but she was getting sick in the mornings and was actually surprised when a pregnancy test came back negative. When I got home, Tina was there. To my surprise. She was never usually home before me, so this was a pleasant surprise until I actually saw her. Her eyes were roomy and unfocused when she told me she was having difficulty keeping food down. I tried making her mac and cheese, which was off the dieting list but was one of her favorites. Within moments of gulping some down, Tina was running to the bathroom, where I held her hair as she fired the mac and cheese into the toilet. Eventually she settled on a salad made of those leaves Chris had given her. An hour or so later and she was up and active again, cleaning things in the apartment and talking about upcoming problems at work. I did everything I could to listen supportively, but her issues kept hinging on important issues like the potential materials that could be used for a facade. I ended up not saying anything at all. At around 10 I saw her eating a small salad before she told me that she had to leave for an errand. I didn't even bother asking for the excuse. When I woke up, Tina was moaning softly. I turned over and gasped. Her skin was pale and seemed oily. Her breathing sounded ragged and weak and there were dark purplish circles around her eyes and fingernails. I told her to relax and that I was calling an ambulance and calling her job to let them know she wouldn't be able to take calls today. Her office went to a receptionist in a different department. Apparently Chris had called in sick as well as Dim, their boss. It was time to go to the hospital. I was packing some of the leaves, just in case they were the problem and the doctor had the ability to do something about it, when Tina's phone rang. It was Chris. When I accepted the call, I heard a horrible gag on the other end of the line, something between someone saying something, throwing up and crying at the same time. Then the line cut out. I tried to call back, but there was no answer. I didn't have time for it, or to wait who knows how long for an ambulance. I got Tina in the car and we went to the hospital. After hours of waiting a doctor finally came by to tell me that they had no idea what was wrong with Tina and they had never seen that plant before. They could tell her liver was going batshit and that something was wrong with her nervous system, but they just didn't know what it was. Blood tests were still coming back. She was unconscious and probably would be for quite some time. It bears mentioning that I may not have been thinking clearly at this point. I knew goddamned well it was either that plant or Chris that was responsible and I was going to find out which one. I thanked the doctor for the information and told them that I had to take care of something for Tina. I never understood why, but Chris got a substantially larger paycheck than Tina ever did. Tina mentioned it was a reality, but didn't seem bothered by it despite their equal job titles and the fact that Chris seemed to rely on her a lot. Chris's small Caribbean-style yellow and blue house may not have looked impressive to a non-Floridian. The painstaking craftsmanship needed to flawlessly restore a 100-year-old wooden building on Palm Beach Island implied that the M5 outside was not at all out of place. The Porsche parked behind it looked familiar, but I couldn't quite remember whose it was. I knocked on the door and waited a moment, but no one came. I knew waiting outside of someone's home in a multi-million-dollar neighborhood was a bad idea. I opened the door and walked inside. I almost had a second to take in the beautiful beachy decor when the smell hit me. Not rot, something worse. I pressed my shirt into my face, almost smothering myself. Hello, Chris? You okay, man? Suddenly I heard gagging coming from the rear room. I moved as fast as I could, despite the horrific smell. It was like changing the channel from Martha Stewart to a horror movie. In a single moment the scene went from white and blue to dark red and green. I vomited almost immediately. Then my sense of smell kind of went away entirely. After several moments, I finally took in the picture. Chris and his boss, Tim Stenson, were both laying on the polished wood floor of Chris's bedroom in their boxers. Chris was still alive, and seemed to be in even worse shape than Tina had been that morning. Tim was dead, his abdomen had been hollowed out like a pumpkin. The inside of him was lined with a thick coat of what looked like tiny green blades of grass. Despite the blood, I noticed that there were no organs lying about. Help Chris finally managed to force out. I shot up like a bullet and started dialing 911 right away. I saw Chris's hands move and his head shake slowly, as if trying to warn me, when suddenly I heard a window slide open in the living room in front of us. I went to Chris as two bony white arms jaunted awkwardly through the window. Chris's hand tried to move in the direction of the window, but his eyes rolled to the back of his head as he did. A horrible sound, like thin, rapid and ragged breathing came from the window. I slowly stood up and saw the woman who had sold us the leaves at the farmer's market. She was wearing the same outfit, but had climbed in on all fours and seemed to be smelling the ground. I took a step back. She stared at me with what looked like shock and opened her mouth. Her maw stretched from one end of her face to the other, and a long, thin tongue darted out from between several rows of thick, grinding teeth. She shook her head repeatedly into the air as she moved her tongue from side to side before settling the direction of Chris and I. Vegetables. The word wasn't so much spoken as accidentally created, a side effect of this thing's breathing. I snapped out of it and grabbed a decorative croquet mallet that had been mounted on the wall. The thing lurched forward, almost inquisitively, before suddenly springing forward, launching itself into the entrance of the bedroom while its tongue seemed to search the air. It seemed to lurch again, when I brought the mallet down on the top of its head with every bit of force my fat ass could summon. The mallet's head and the ugly thing crumpled to the ground. A splash of some cold green ichor flew across the room at the same instant. A cold, soft hand wrapped itself around my ankle with unusual strength and I felt something sharp and burning, like a wasp's stinger, burying itself in my flesh. I brought the ragged spike of what was left of the mallet down and it went easily into the soft flesh of the thing's head. There was no crunch or crack of bone, and while the flesh was strangely dense, it was also very soft. It went to the floor, and the thing released my leg, but it kept moving. Green goo flowed freely across the floor, mingling with human blood. Despite being impaled through the head, the thing that looked like a woman writhed on the ground, her mouth open and her tongue darting in and out, as if in search of something. I brought the shattered, wet stick down on her head until only soft pulp remained. The tongue still moved, and I could see something squirming all the way down the woman's throat and back. As I stood staring in shock, a low moan reminded me to check on Chris. His pulse was weak, but his breathing was all right. I moved him away from the room, into the living room, and he seemed to wake up a bit and struggle to help me. I got him a glass of water from the kitchen, and when I got back, I could see the fallen corpse of the woman was gone. I went into the bedroom with a kitchen knife, but she was dead all right. Parts of a human skull, a lot of teeth-like things and part of a ribcage remained, but the flesh around them was rapidly decomposing into terrible-smelling green and white viscous goo. The bones themselves looked as if they had been partially dissolved. For some reason, I'm not sure why, it occurred to me that it would look less like I was a murderer if I tried to help Chris instead of fleeing the scene. It wasn't easy, but I got him into the back seat of my car. If that bitch was looking for him, it probably was interested in Chris too, and I didn't want my only living witness to the facts that I didn't kill Tim and that the fat woman attacked me to die. Once I pulled into JFK Memorial's parking lot, 2 police officers and an orderly jogged up to me at the same time. They doubled back to get a stretcher when they saw Chris, but I gathered there was an issue with Tina. I dashed in when they managed to get him secured and told me that they would update me when and if they could. I had never run so hard in my life. By the time I was at the top floor I was out of breath and the ankle that woman grabbed was throbbing. For a moment there I felt like Tina would be proud of me, but when I opened the door the room was empty except for a guy who was fatter than I am. The man with a face the color and texture of pork half demanded half pleaded with me to tell me where Tina was and when she was coming back. Because I'm not married to Tina, the only things I could figure out was that Tina had left the hospital of her own volition and that the hospital staff wasn't entirely happy about it. Fucking hipper bullshit. The man muttered after they told me they couldn't say more. Thankfully none of the cops in the front seemed to mind my squealing tires as I headed home. I have never had a pit in my stomach like I had as I raced home. A sun shower of epic proportions was raging, with rain everywhere backed by an unbelievably glare-capable sun and some areas covered in sun-defeating clouds to give the world a dark overlay. It can be a bit difficult to drive in, but I sped anyways. I almost turned the corner of my street when I saw Tina's car with an open door. It was parked in our driveway, but no one was in it. I decided to wait back a few minutes and sure enough, Tina came running out the front door. I couldn't see her very well, but she looked like she was limping and holding her side. I killed my headlights just in time to avoid her seeing them as she went to the driveway. I saw her red hair swirl as she got into her Miata and drove away, gunning it in our neighborhood. I was worried she would notice me following her, but she fired past 2 stop signs and almost hit a van, ignoring an old man's honks as she fled. She wasn't paying attention to anything. The pit in my stomach had turned into a cold, icy ball. She began to take a familiar route, heading to the farmer's market. But when she reached the park where it's held she kept going. I had to pull into a gas station to avoid following her too closely on the one-lane road she turned onto, hiding my car behind a cluster of palm trees that allowed me to see her headlights. It looked like she had taken me to Riviera Beach. Riviera Beach was directly north of Northwood, where the farmer's market was held. It is an up-and-coming yuppie neighborhood, slowly gentrifying Riviera Beach, but the road Tina pulled onto was filled with bleak buildings no one had bothered to knock down or repair since Hurricane Wilma. After a truck pulled onto the road I carefully got behind it, keeping a little left on the lane so that I could see Tina's brake lights. It didn't take long before I saw them turn into the parking lot of a condemned condo. The building sprung up from the tropical slum like a great, black, rotting tooth. Even the palms surrounding it were spindly and untrimmed, making them look unnaturally tall and gaunt. I slowly approached the side of the parking lot that lined the road with sea grapes and kept my lights off, waiting for her brake lights to turn off. I opened my window and the sound of her car door followed shortly after. I made sure the coast was clear before I parked myself and was shocked to see a group of nice luxury cars parked directly in front of the crumbling former tenement. Something cast a thin maroon light through the lobby of the former slum tower and I didn't see anyone inside. I parked as far away from the BMWs and Lexi while still staying as close to the door as I could and fatly attempted to sneak to the unguarded front door. I could feel my ankle pulse with every step. The glass had long ago been shattered, allowing animals, hobos and apparently yuppies to come and go as they pleased, but the reek of chlorophyll and rot would probably keep the hobos and raccoons away. I began to open one of the doors, but after some creaking decided to just walk through like everyone else probably did. The maroon light seemed to gently find its way out of an open elevator shaft at the end of the small lobby. The smell was awful. I inched my way to the doors and expected it to come from above, since Florida doesn't usually do basements, but this one seemed to have developed a sinkhole. The ground below the elevator seemed to have broken through the foundation of the building and the light was coming from this wound. The bottom of the elevator shaft formed the more of a passageway below the building, where I could hear voices echoing from some long distance. I looked around for a weapon and found a piece of loose rebar that was sharp on one end and called the police, telling them I had heard gunshots from the building. The tunnel below the building got wider and seemed to be made of more rock and less earth as it went on. Every inch of the rock on the floor was covered in thick flora. I distinctly recalled a teacher telling me that there was no limestone and therefore no sinkholes in South Florida. Looks like he was half right. The maroon light got stronger as the tunnel suddenly curved sharply, changing direction. The image of a single corkscrew-shaped tentacle of stone reaching through the earth to touch this building pushed itself into my head. After about 5 minutes the tunnel widened and curved again, into an even larger opening where I could see floodlights had been set up. The plant life had formed a thick carpet here, with several large uneven spots. I poked my head around the corner, and no one was there. I could hear voices bouncing off the rock ahead and I tightened my grip on the rebar. I walked through the room, hoping someone had left a better weapon behind, when I noticed the flood lamps seemed to be not only covered with the plant life, there were several that seemed to be overridden entirely, with light barely escaping thick nets of moss. In between two of them was the body of a woman. She had a peaceful expression on what was left of her face, but she had clearly been torn apart and reassembled only afterwards. Her arms and legs were not attached to her torso, which had been hollowed out and filled with growing plant life. The thick lichen-like plants had grown over half of her face and in between her severed limbs, making her appear as if she were not only whole, but pregnant with a swollen belly filled with life. I felt something horrible rushing into my mouth and a split second later I was shocked to see vomit flying out of my mouth. It only lasted a second, but the echoes of voices and jingling made it clear that someone was coming to investigate. Since there was only one way to the echoes, I pressed my body against the side of the wall next to the cavity that seemed to lead to the other chamber as someone approached. A young Asian man with an elaborate jacket that said Supreme on it came out a moment later. He seemed to be limping and in a great deal of pain. He walked right past me and barely glanced at the room, but didn't bother looking behind him. I wondered how I would explain self-defense from behind to a police officer before I hit him in the back of the head with the rebar. He dropped and I checked his pulse and breathing, which may have been meaningless, but I hoped I hadn't killed him. I continued down the corridor for another minute, the echoes getting louder with every step despite the fact that everything other than the ceiling had a dense carpet of what seemed almost like grass at times. Finally, I arrived. The corridor opened into what seemed like a massive green cavern. It must have been directly under that former slum tower. Floodlights in various stages of digestion ringed the room and surrounded 4 extremely well-dressed people in the center, all on their knees. 2 more women, both looking exactly like the one I killed, were in the room. One was basking, with her mouth open, in the glow of a floodlight. The other was hovering over the abdomen of a black man who appeared to be dead. Her mouth was wide open as her whip-like tongue pressed against the dead skin and moved rapidly in between the body and her throat. But none of them got my attention like the ringmaster in the center. They were surrounding another thing that looked like the woman I killed earlier that day. This one appeared to be larger, with drastically longer arms and fingers and a body that was impossibly ball-like. Her mouth was wide open as they seemed to be worshipping her. Her tongue suddenly darted in the air and I heard a horrible hissing sound when suddenly the people in the room turned to look at me. I was pants-shittingly afraid, but I saw Tina there. Her eyes were even wider than the rest. I saw her mouth move up and down but make no noise as she looked desperately at the horrible thing in the center. The creep woman in the center made a noise that sounded like an attempt to cough and curse simultaneously, and the one sucking light shot up and ran towards me, as well as one of the men kneeling around what seemed like the leader creep, who rose with a roar of anger. His eyes had massive bruises around them and he was bleeding from his mouth, but he was fucking huge. I had only a second to back into the corridor as they reached me. The man, a massive blonde guy in a polo shirt and khakis, came at me first, being a good bit faster than the women. I didn't have enough room to swing, and have never been athletic, but I remembered hearing my favorite history professor telling me about how the phalanx maneuver was successful because it made close quarters combat a bitch. I held the rebar like a javelin and ended up jabbing the rebar at him like spear, ramming it directly into an eye socket that rewarded me with a warm spray of blood. He reached up to grab the rebar and punch me, but the sharp edge of the broken rebar made it easier for me to pull back than it was for him to risk grabbing it. I jabbed him again, darting back when he tried to grab the safer part of the rebar. He put up his hands in a boxing stance to guard his face, but I just took that as an invitation to attack the living shit out of his hands, breaking his left wrist after ramming it as hard as I could. I could hear a horrible hissing behind him, but the women couldn't flank me in the corridor. I jabbed him again as he brought his broken wrist down, and this time instead of flailing to grab the rebar he attempted to punch me. I managed to jump back and then jump forward again, bringing the rebar into the front of his skull, and hard. Broken syllables fell out of his mouth as he poured the air in front of him, blood pouring over his face. I reared back and pushed the sharp end of the metal into his now unguarded neck, using my entire body to push him and the women back. He pushed back at first, and was obviously much stronger than I, but after I took the metal out of his neck he went limp and then fell. I felt the breath go out of him as I put one shoe, and then another, on his back as I furiously slammed and sliced that rebar into whichever woman had managed to get to the front of the line. They fell the moment the rebar hit them, and I rammed it into their soft skulls one after another, jabbing each and darting back whenever I saw movement, leaving a soft pulpy mess on the ground. I walked through the entrance of the cavern once more. My ankle was in more pain than I had ever experienced before, but the sight of Tina's face, as she cowered with her new friends, gave me some kind of feeling that this was still reality, and I had a job to do. What the fuck is this? I could hear the words coming out of my mouth, but I have no idea what I expected to hear as an answer. Please, please, I heard Tina say as she shook her head. The two others were tending to the woman and looked terrified of me. The beautiful Hispanic woman and the elderly white woman who looked very sick seemed to be trying to protect it with their bodies. Tina began to attempt to stand and I took a step towards her, but the woman began to run around her protectors and towards me, making an enraged hissing noise as she went. She dropped to all fours before reaching me, and just as I was about to bring the rebar down again, lashed out with one of her bony hands, raking my hand and arm, flaying the skin and fat with these. I howled in pain and brought the rebar down, missing on the first swing but catching the little shit by hitting it like a golf club as I brought the rebar up again. It was shockingly light and flipped over, landing on its back. I felt its hand wrap around my good ankle, and whatever it did, the pain was unfucking believable. I went down. I landed on my back parallel to the thing. There was a sharp pain in every part of my body that touched that grass that was replaced by a tingly numbness immediately. I had no time to react as I saw the thing, still on its back, with its arms bent at unnatural angles, crawling over me. I screamed as it slammed one hand, then another, down over mine, pinning me. The back of its dress waved in my face as its head quickly spun around on its neck, showing me a massive mouth that had stretched open like a snake's. I felt a horrible pain on top of my head and heard a terrible grinding sound in my head and ears as the thing's tongue began to probe, then wrap around my neck. Suddenly the thing jerked violently to the side and I could breathe again. Tina stood over me triumphantly with the rebar, leaning on it like a cane. I got up as quickly as I could and without thinking twice began to stomp furiously on the thing that had almost begun to eat me before a really confused Asian kid stumbled in and asked where he was and what the fuck was going on. The next few weeks were pretty confusing. The cops were brushed aside by the FBI that made it clear that it would not be a smart idea to go to the press with our experiences, as that would force them to file charges of murder against me. They didn't tell us anything, but nothing we said seemed to surprise the list of agents interviewing us over and over for the next few months, often asking the same questions even in the same interview. Years later, Tina would tell me that she was under the impression that there were other groups, elsewhere, and that some of FBI agents may have come under the influence of those fucking leaves as well. That thing, whatever it was the plants. Tina told me she had seen it, that she didn't have a choice. It wasn't like a trance, just an uncontrollable impulse. To keep eating those leaves, to go somewhere strange at night, to stand idly by while those things that looked like women waited for their victims to lie down for them and be eaten and then reborn. She said she was horrified the entire time, but that she couldn't control herself when the impulses came. She thinks that thing had been placed there intentionally when it was being planned as a ghetto, and that it wasn't a problem until newcomers moved in. She says she saw things when she slept, things from a long time ago, memories from people whose bodies were used to fertilize the plants that would trap new victims. She still has nightmares from time to time, but we get by. It's been 6 years since either of us have eaten a vegetable that didn't come from a can, and she's starting to adjust to the extra weight. I was already a pro. So, when you see people like us getting boxes of cakes at Walmart, remember, you wouldn't want to ride a mile in our rascals. We have our reasons for not eating a damned salad. Story 5, I will never go cave diving again. I've always been a bit of an adventure junkie. Whether it's jumping from a plane at 16,000 feet, or a simple hike with a dear friend, I cherish it all for the thrill it provides, and the memories it forms. So, when Martin, an old friend of mine, came to me with a unique proposal, I made sure to listen. Martin is an anthropologist. For the better part of the last 25 years his explorations have focused primarily on blue holes. Deep flooded networks of underground passages in some of the most remote places on Earth. He asked me if I would join him on his next venture in place of his assistant who wouldn't be able to make the trip. I was skeptical, as I had little experience with scuba, and zero in a cave environment. I was up for the challenge, but also a bit nervous about being dozens of meters underwater in tunnels about the size of sewer pipes. I was assured by Martin that it would not be that way. However, he said the dive was an open cavern, and there were no plans to do anything too crazy. I accepted after a bit of deliberation and completed the 6 months course geared towards cave diving safety. Soon after I found myself on a plane bound for the Bahamas. I met the team on the island of Andros, and we headed out together. We arrived at the nearest parking lot and unloaded the equipment. After lugging some 30 kilograms of equipment an hour through the muggy trails, we finally arrived at our oasis. At first glance it was just a hole in the ground filled with water. I would have never guessed that the little pond plunged to over 60 meters down. The water level was about 5 meters below the lip of the cave, and was orchestrated in a manner reminiscent of a toilet bowl. An oblong circular ledge made of limestone leading to a 5-meter drop into the water below. The only way in was to jump. We geared up, had a last-minute powwow and then took the plunge. There were 6 of us that entered the pool. In addition to Martin and myself was Javier, his right-hand man and close friend. Tank, a local guy who was an expert in the area. And the camera crew consisting of Rory and his wife Dawn. The alpha pool where we entered is over 60 meters deep, but from the surface it might as well be endless. Our primary headlamps illuminated only patches of the abyss. Crystallized stalagmites jutted from the walls and ceiling like spikes in an Iron Maiden. The sides of the cave were dotted with narrow corridors and slim cracks in the wall. Some plant and algae specimens existed, but not many. We took our time on the way down, pausing and glancing around the area. Rory and Dawn filmed over the rock walls slowly, taking long wide passes to capture each nook and cranny. Javier laid the guideline, a coil of reinforced twine designed to mark our path. Some 5 meters below us a dense canopy of orange haze came into view. The coloration was due to the presence of hydrogen sulfide. Bacteria feeds on animals that fall in and drown and excrete the foul substance. It is a poisonous substance that smells like rotten eggs. Makes your lips tingle, and prolonged exposure can cause brain damage. On the other side of the hydrogen sulfide cloud was the oxygen-free zone. This is one of the main draws for anthropologists like Martin. The water at the bottommost regions are completely devoid of oxygen. This means that natural decomposition does not occur because bacteria and other microbes can't survive. Biologic material can be preserved for much longer than it would be at the surface. The caverns serve as a sort of time capsule, and an anthropologist's gold mine. Martin touched down and began stewing around in the muck on the cavern floor some 30 meters down. Around him clumps of silt and biologic compost stirred into an underwater torrent that soon clouded the area. His assistants joined him soon after and began their soiree into the silt pile. The team ended up finding several well-preserved specimens including the skulls and various remains of a rock iguana, a leatherback turtle, a wild hog, several types of small birds and fish, an albatross and a bacara deer. The discovery of fish remains meant that at some point the cave was connected to another waterway. Perhaps it still was. By far the most interesting discovery, however, was one that was not immediately recognized. A large almost basket-like bony plate with bumpy ridges along the outer shell. It was thought to be a large turtle shell, but the curvature of its shape made that unlikely. Unfortunately, it was entirely too large to haul back to the surface. Martin theorized that the shell belonged to an extinct mammalian creature known as Glyptodon. Think giant ice age armadillo with the head of a wombat. If Martin's suspicion was correct, it would be the first remnant of Glyptodon to ever be discovered in the Caribbean. The beast went extinct some 10,000 years ago, but the finding seemed to bring that analysis back into question. Maybe Glyptodon stayed around a little longer than previously believed. We performed another several dives over the next few days, going deeper and deeper each time. We explored several side passages as well that branched away from the alpha pool. At one point we were traveling down a tunnel, when we came to an extremely narrow fork in the road. The path to the left appeared to widen and branch out, while the one to the right appeared to narrow even further and continue downward. Much to my chagrin, Martin chose the right-hand path. The opening could not have been more than a half-meter in diameter. Martin went through, followed by 3 others, and then it was my turn. I chickened out. Tank swam up behind me, and I just shook my head gesturing for him to proceed. He made the OK signal and ventured on through while I stayed behind. I meandered about in that area, twiddling my thumbs as I waited for the group to return. At one point, my headlamp caught something that sparkled on the cave wall. I moved towards it for a better look. I soon discovered it to be a small, rusted chain necklace with an intricate pendant attached. I took it and admired it in my hand, thinking maybe another member of the crew had lost it. It had no visible markings, and the style was one I was not familiar with. While I stared, enamored with my discovery, something shifted from the corner of my eye. I turned to see an indistinct shadow slither out of sight, like a snake made from obsidian. It was impossible though. We were below the oxygen threshold. No creature could survive down there, at least not one that required oxygen. It must have just stemmed from my overactive imagination left alone in the dark. That's what I chose to believe anyway. The team returned several minutes later and we ascended back to the brim of the alpha pool. Something was different though. The other members of the dive team had grown unusually quiet, especially after a successful dive. Even Javier, the most vocal of the team, was now stoic. Martin pulled me aside soon after, and I was informed why we found something. He spoke the words without an ounce of his usual enthusiasm. Martin swallowed hard and glanced back to the rest of the crew. He went on to tell me how he had continued on in that narrow corridor and after several minutes came to a dead end. It was there he found it. In a pile of silt and muck, a vibrant strand of yellow polyester stood out. A pile of bones wrapped with a black and yellow tattered garment lay discombobulated on the chamber floor. These bones were different though. One look at the skull and equipment and he knew they were human. Martin discovered soon after that it was a fellow diver. Accidents like that are a grim reality of the profession. A lot of good lives people have been lost to the depths of blue holes. It seems that this man, whoever he was, suffered the same fate. His equipment was shredded, almost beyond recognition, but fragments of his dive suit and mask remained. He must have been down there for quite a long time. We talked over the discovery of the lost diver and took a moment to pay our silent respects. I told them about the necklace and displayed it around as well. Martin remained silent, not eating his dinner and remaining distant from the group. After a few minutes, I decided to check on him. No one's ever been down that far before. He looked me dead in the eye when he said it, a worried grimace on his grizzled cheeks, at least not that we know of. He clarified. Here I had been under the impression that the entire system had already been thoroughly explored and mapped out, but obviously that wasn't the case. I had no intention of returning into that god-forsaken hole after the discovery of the deceased diver. Martin understood, but wasn't ready to call it quits. After all, there was one more passage that needed investigation. Martin theorized it to be the most grandiose of them all. A realm of submerged majesty, unscathed by human hands. One which, upon our return, would be named for us. I don't know how or why his words managed to convince me, but I soon found myself suited up once again, floating at the surface of the Alpha Pool. We performed the usual routine, and one by one my colleagues sank below for one more dive. We made our way back to the same tunnel as the previous escapade. This time at the fork, we took the left-hand path. Martin took the lead and stepped into the corridor. Each methodical kick he took stirred a flurry of silt into the water. In no time visibility in the tunnel became nil as our group stumbled blindly onward. Crumbling debris rained down from the roof as we pressed on, and I lost all sight of the rest of our crew. My heart rate began to climb yet again as the dense cloud spiraled around me. I clutched the guideline for dear life with my left hand, while my right moved along the tunnel wall. For several minutes I stumbled along blind in the fog with only my sense of touch guiding the way. The porous rock then suddenly turned into a smooth, almost squishy sensation. I retracted my hand out of instinct, but curiosity drove me back. I felt along the wall, until the squishy sensation returned. My hand began to clench, when suddenly the thing jerked. I felt it wiggle away, and my heart sunk like an anchor. I hustled forward, now with the new sense of urgency. I bumped my head several times as I moved, but finally, the dense fog dispersed and I emerged from the fog. Only to be met with an empty chasm of endless black that stretched beyond sight in every direction. I looked back to see the murky tunnel from which I had come, and the stone wall which dove dozens of meters down. Martin, Javier, Rory and Dawn were all drifting a couple meters out, surrounded by nothing but the void. We regrouped and Martin removed a glow stick from his pack. He cracked it, and stared for a moment before releasing his grip. The neon green candle drifted downward further and further. We must have watched it sink for at least half a minute before it finally appeared to come to a rest at the bottom. By that point it was only a single green pixel on a 4K display. It must have been hundreds of meters deep. The light then vanished entirely, likely snuffed out from the immense pressure below. We lingered for a moment, waiting for Martin to decide on a plan. A muffled squeal then escaped Dawn's lips with a flurry of bubbles. We turned to Dawn, to see her frantically tapping Rory and pointing downward. We looked down and stared in disbelief as the glow stick appeared to begin to rise upward from the bottom. I began to back away towards the tunnel, now with my heart clamoring and mind screaming for me to get the hell out. The light continued to ascend, seeming to pick up speed as it went. It also looked as though it had changed color from neon green to more of a blue tint. The light also seemed to be changing shape rapidly, as if bending from side to side. Dawn began to move towards me, but the rest of the team stared down, transfixed by the glowing spectacle. Others began to back away one by one as the light drew nearer. Eventually Martin was the only one who remained. The light then reached him, and our headlamps revealed it for what it was. An Elor lamprey of some sort, maybe 2 feet in length and solid black. The blue light we had seen was imprinted along its belly as some kind of bioluminescent display. The creature began to circle Martin slowly, as if curious. Martin appeared almost enthralled by the thing. It was without a doubt nothing like any creature I had ever seen. Probably one which would be entirely new to science. The creature then drifted a few feet away from Martin and began moving in a strange motion. The best word I can use to describe it would be a sort of dance. It would pause briefly and then wiggle quickly before pausing again. It repeated the motion over and over, staying true to its pattern. It was almost hypnotizing to behold. Despite the interesting find, I felt a dread begin to mount in my stomach. A minuscule flash then caught my eye from below. There was another one, and it too was rising towards us. Another flashed to life a second later, followed quickly by another. Soon dozens of them began to emerge and follow suit with the others. The second soon joined the first beside Martin, and straightway began the same peculiar display in perfect synchronization with the first. A third joined in, then a fourth. I looked down again, and my heart lurched into my throat. The entire area below us had begun to glow as hundreds of the things became illuminated and rose like a flock of dazzling blue embers. In the middle of them though, a much larger light took form. It began to rise, sparkles of blue flashing upon it in a dazzling performance. Martin had finally seen enough. He turned to join us, but it was too late. As soon as he moved, one of the eels lunged for him, coiling itself around his arm and digging into his flesh. Dozens joined the attack within seconds as it turned into an all-out feeding frenzy. I heard Martin scream, but there was never any hope of saving him. The rest of us fled immediately, back into the dingy silt-laden passage that had led us in. Dawn went first, followed quickly by Javier and then me. I moved as quickly as I could through the passage, blinded by the slurry but caring only about escape at all cost. Behind me I heard a torrential commotion as the voracious creatures pursued us. There was a sudden burst of energy from behind. It was like an underwater sonic boom followed quickly by the clanging of metal meeting rock repeatedly. The tunnel itself seemed to groan in protest as what I can only assume was a burst air tank began to clang around wildly. I finally burst from the tunnel, and re-entered the bottom of the Alpha pool. I clawed my way frantically through the depths in a desperate bid to reach the surface. For a split second I peered back over my shoulder as a muffled scream gurgled through the cave. I saw Tank there, frantic as a mass of slippery black serpents began to tear into him. Parts of his face and body were stripped of flesh in seconds, leaving only skeletal remains in their wake. He ceased his struggle, and the mob enveloped him. "I'm so sorry, Tank." The words echoed in my mind as I turned and made a mad dash upwards. I felt them closing in behind me as the smell of rotten eggs filled my nostrils. Several razor mouths gripped onto my leg as I swam, breaking into the red mist of the hydrogen sulfide. I thought I was done for, when the mouths released their grips. I turned as I cleared the putrid layer and saw hundreds of the vile glowing things staring back up at me. They continued their same dancing motion, hundreds of them in perfect unison. A much larger shadow bulged from the cluster. This one was massive, at least 10 times the size of its kin. It did not wiggle like the others. It drifted silently, bearing a mouth of hundreds of razor teeth and ornate, almost rune-like splotches of neon blue on its skin. Its mouth jutted from its head, as what can only be described as an umbrella of hooked teeth gleamed in the sparse cavern light. I could sense its hunger, but also something else. The way it drifted was methodical, and the little ones cleared a path as it came through. It was almost like they were communicating. My saving grace was that it and its minions refused to cross the red barrier of the hydrogen sulfide. I kept an eye on her. The large one, the brood mother. I rose to the surface, and burst from the underworld and back into mine. Dawn, Javier and myself were the only ones to return from that dreadful place. The pain eats at me daily for those we lost, and I wish we had never entered that god-forsaken place. It's not safe. The cave itself has since been sealed off, with no one allowed to re-enter it. The members we lost are still down there, forever entombed in the murky depths. I still don't know how those things were able to survive down there. The only explanation I can think of is undoubtedly the most troubling. The cave connects to another source of water. I've told this story to several sources, but none of them ever take me seriously. I am done worrying whether people will believe me. Some days I don't even believe me. I just hope for all our sake, that the cave is not in fact connected to any other waterway like I believe it is. I can't imagine what would happen if those things ever got out. Needless to say though, I don't think I'll be planning another cave diving trip anytime soon. Story 6, just keep your headphones in. I have been out of the mental institution for several years now and I have one piece of advice for you, just keep your headphones in. I always thought I had a super active imagination growing up. I used to love playing pretend with my best friends, and in particular I loved being outside and surrounding myself with the sounds of nature. The city always fascinated me to no end. The bustling crowds of people and the streams of car which would move swiftly through the streets, a man-made river. In high school, I used to put headphones in and listen to music on my way to school. There was usually lots of sounds, and to mentally prepare myself, I had to listen to some music. I would walk from class to class just listening to music, and vaguely in the background, I could hear the idle chatter of other students. I never paid it any mind. It certainly was never my business. In college, I began to smoke weed heavily and, like in high school, continued putting my headphones in and listening to music from academic hall to academic hall. College students were much chattier, and, soon enough, I became one of those college kids who would just hang out at the campus center terrace for hours at a time, and striking up conversations with some of my closest friends and occasionally a professor. I spent long hours at the library studying for my classes, and when it was closing time, I would pack up and just enjoy the quiet stroll home without listening to anything. I just wanted to enjoy the solitude and quiet that was inextricably linked to the brick paths which wound through the heavily forested campus. It was an incredibly gorgeous campus, especially at night. On Fridays, drunken college students would be having conversations going to a pre-game or a party. I loved listening to these conversations, and I felt as though I was living vicariously through these people. I was walking home one night when I heard some chattering happen at this empty gazebo on top of a hill where a lot of stoners would gather and chill. I thought I would go up there and partake with some downtime. I was always carrying pot on me. When I reached the gazebo, I was surprised to find that no one was in the dimly lit gazebo. I was certain there were people having a conversation there. I brushed it off and just smoked a bowl by myself before going back to the dorms. Another time, I was smoking a cigarette on the steps on the math building after my analysis final. It was the last day of finals, and I suddenly felt a hand on my shoulder and my best friend, who asked me how I did. I answered that I thought I did well as I got up and turned to no one next to me. I thought I had just heard him through one of the open windows. And that evening I texted him wondering what time he finished. He had finished an hour before I did. I spent the summer leading up to my senior year at home and relaxing. I began to experiment with psychedelics and found that I had the most wonderful experiences on acid. I would trip once a week and just sit and draw while listening to Grateful Dead. I realized that I loved the color, and in particular I loved the color crimson. I was always writing down how I felt during my come down in a diary. It made me feel elated. Life had so much color in it. Soon I was tripping every 3 days, and when we got back to school, I just stopped going to class. It was surreal. I dropped out of school, and for 2 years I was living off my wealthy parents while tripping consistently. Then the voices I was ignoring became much more prominent, and took a very dark tone. I was plagued with random bursts of yelling in the distance which always said red is good. Blood is red. Kill. The timbre was always the same, monotone and dry. My anxiety skyrocketed, and during my first nervous breakdown while tripping, I blacked out and skinned a squirrel which I had caught running around in the backyard. I found myself bound to a white bed in a white sterile room with a beautiful arrangement of different colored flowers placed in a slender clear glass vase on the table next to me when I woke up a few days later. I had slathered squirrel blood on every item in my room and wrote down a simplified proof of Cauchy's integral theorem on the walls. I had spent a lot of time at the institution not doing much except going from counseling session back to my room to take my medicine. After 6 months of institutionalization, I was permitted to leave under the custody of my parents. They were so relieved that I could finally come home, and to be honest, I was relieved too. I wanted to finally go back to school and continue the life I so recklessly thrown away. That night, I laid in my bed with my headphones in, just trying to drive those voices that had been quieted by the medicine as I was lulled to sleep listening to Nocturne Opus 48 No. 1 by Chopin. That morning, I woke up feeling incredibly stiff and sore. My mom had decided to stay home and take care of me. She brought my medicine, some water, and cereal. I asked my mom to help crack my back, something I had needed to do for quite a while. I cracked my neck and next thing I knew, I had blacked out, and when I came to, I was tripping very hard and the eggshell white walls of my room were each covered in a beautiful coat of crimson. I was holding the spoon now doused in red and my mom's neck had been twisted around. She was on her back, face down, and her body was contorted with her hands in a clawing position around her neck. Splashes of crimson, almost auburn, ran down the walls in such a show of brilliant art. It looks like a painting from the Museum of Modern Art in New York. On the ceiling was a proof for why there are infinitely many irrationals. I called the police. I was arrested and later found not guilty by reason of insanity. A decade later I was released. I know I said you should keep your headphones in, and maybe you should, but after spending so long in a white sterile place, what is life without a little bit of color? Story 7, my dead fiancé keeps calling me. My fiancé, David, died in a car accident 6 months ago. We had been together for 4 years before it happened. We met in our sophomore year of college and we hit it off so much that we began dating within a week. He had gone to the nice store 3 towns over to get me some ice cream because it was the time and I was feeling pretty moody. The store was only a 45-minute round trip, so after an hour passed, I was getting worried. I called 3 times over the course of 2 hours, with no answer. I got the news from his mother at around 10 p.m. The officers at the scene told her a semi-truck flipped in front of David on the interstate and he drove directly into it. He died upon impact. I was devastated when I got that call. In all reality, I still am. I still feel guilty about it. I know that I'm not the one who flipped that truck, but it's hard not to feel at fault when something like this happens. I keep thinking, if I hadn't asked for that pint of chocolate ice cream, David would still be here. If I hadn't begged for him to go into the city for the fancy ice cream, my fiancé would not have died at age 24. We used to chat using Facebook Messenger when he was at work because he didn't like traditional texting. There are years of our history in that app. Sometimes I read through our old conversations. A few times that I was feeling particularly lost without him, like on our anniversary and his birthday, I have sent him tearful messages. I know that it's basically like shouting into a void, but it makes me feel a little better. Recently, I have been getting some strange activity from his Facebook Messenger account. It started about 2 weeks ago. I keep getting notifications that his account is active. Obviously, it is not possible for a dead man to log into Facebook, but it tore at my heart to see the words, "David is currently active." It reminded me of all of the times he would message me sweet things while he was on break. Messenger is a very glitchy app, so I calmed myself and told myself it was an error. At least, that's what I assumed the first 2 times I saw it. When I saw it a 3rd time several days later, I was certain some hacker from Russia or Malaysia had managed to log into David's account. It's definitely not unheard of. I've gone through my attempted logins on Facebook and saw attempts from all over the world. I doubted that the intruder had any idea that they hacked into the account of a dead man, but it still angered me. I decided to let them have it. Through tears, I typed, "Listen here. I know you're likely some sort of hacker that randomly got into David's account, but you need to leave this account alone." David died in a car accident several months ago and it is very agonizing to his friends and family to see that his account is online. I'm sure there are thousands of other people's accounts to hack into. Just, please, leave this one alone. I didn't get a response. I wasn't expecting one, honestly. I just hoped that I had convinced the person to stop. I checked back on the message for the next 3 days because I couldn't stop thinking about the ordeal. Thankfully, the account had been offline since the day I sent the message. I believed that my message convinced the person to leave the account alone, which brought me relief. Later that night, his account was highly sporadic. It was going active and inactive every several minutes. I messaged again, because seeing that notification over and over was killing me. "Please, stop." Surprisingly, I received a message back. All it said was, "H." I messaged back, "Stop." I got another message from the account. "H-la-o." I didn't respond. I received another message. Hello? I denied them a response, yet again. Several more messages came from the account. Can you assess this? It's I didn't respond. It's divide. I was mad. This fucker was trying to pull some sort of weird, manipulative shit on me. I replied, fuck off, buddy. Get off of David's account. A slew of messages followed in the next few minutes. No. It's David. PL please believe me. Please, Peaches. I was taken aback for a moment. Only David calls me Peaches. He gave me the nickname because I'm from Georgia and I have a thick accent. For a second, I thought it must have been David messaging me. After thinking about it, I realized that the hacker could have easily gone through our old messages and seen that he called me Peaches all the time. I didn't want to fall for this cruel prank. This person was trying to hurt me and I couldn't let them win. Suddenly, my phone started ringing. I looked at my screen. The Messenger app notified me David is calling you on Messenger. My heart raced. I don't know why. But I answered it. Hello? I answered. I couldn't hear anything other than a faint buzzing in the background. I was about to hang up, when I heard his voice. I heard David say Ashley. It's E. His voice was frantic and desperate. I froze. The voice was very faint and intertwined with static, but I knew that was David's voice. I began crying. Between sobs, I said, David, is that really you? Yee. Ashley. Hello. You. The voice kept cutting out. David, how are you calling me? I sputtered out. Before he could answer, the call was dropped. I tried to press the icon to call him back. The call would not go through. I tried again and again, with the same result. After a few minutes, the account went inactive. I was shaken to my very core. Somehow, my dead fiancé managed to contact me through a mobile app. I've never been committed to the idea of ghosts or an afterlife. But here I was, faced with this experience. I knew that was David's voice. I honestly didn't know what to think. I didn't know how to feel. I started to wonder if I had gone flat out insane, because I just couldn't imagine a way that this all could be real. I decided to pour myself a glass of the wine that David and I picked out for a special occasion. Then I poured another glass. Then another. I had drank most of the bottle before I decided to go to bed. As I was sitting there, staring at the ceiling, my phone started to ring. I sluggishly picked it up, and saw something that did not surprise me, but still shocked me nonetheless. David is calling you on Messenger. I wrestled with the idea of answering. I of course wanted to speak to my love, one more time. Yet, I still didn't want to acknowledge the reality of the situation. Eventually, I picked up the call. I waited to hear David speak. Peaches. I miss you. So much. His voice was clearer this time, with much less static than the first call. I drunkenly said back, I miss you, David. I love you. I miss you every second of every day. I was sobbing at this point. The call took a dark, sharp turn. Ashley. Why did you kill me? David's voice said, solemnly. These words hit me like a train. I have been blaming myself all this time, and it borderline broke my soul to hear that David felt the same way. He blamed me, too. I could only manage a whimper in response. Ashley. You killed me. You murdering bitch. David said. His voice had become deeper now, and more distorted. It sounded almost as if two different people were speaking at once. I was so emotionally torn that I could barely process the voice change. Ashley. You should kill yourself. Just like you killed me. The voice became even more split now, with the deeper voice in the background now taking the forefront. Even though I was so mentally strained that I could barely think, I realized something was very wrong here. This voice was no longer David's, and David would never, ever, say things like this to me. My grief and sadness became mixed with fury. You're not David. Who the fuck are you, you piece of shit? I shouted. The voice over the line began to laugh. It started as a chuckle, then began to progress to something more maniacal. David's voice was no longer present. The deep voice had completely taken over. You caught me. I'm not David. but I've gotten to know him pretty well over these 6 months. We're pals now, the voice said. Who the hell are you, and what the hell do you want? The anger took over the sadness. I was blind with rage now. Who I am doesn't matter. I will tell you what I want, though. I want your soul. The voice cackled once more before the call ended. I didn't have time to process the whirlwind of emotions I was feeling, because I saw a Facebook notification at the top of my phone screen that damn near stopped my heart. David is nearby. Story 8, The Devil in Death Valley. Take plenty of water, make sure you have enough fuel, check the engine temperature regularly. The advice wasn't exactly rocket science. But we managed to fuck it up. Now we were stuck way out in Death Valley National Park with a car that wouldn't start and barely enough water to last the next half hour. The 4 of us had set out on the road trip for the 5th anniversary of our college graduation, hoping to recapture some youthful freedom. Instead we'd re-embraced youthful arrogance and irresponsibility, entering the hottest place on earth in August with a quarter tank of gas in a rental car that had been struggling since we picked it up in Utah. The heat hit me as soon as the air conditioning turned off. It lay in the car like a blanket, absorbing us all in a stifling embrace. What's happened? Asked Jay from the backseat. Engine cut out. The temperature went way up just before, it must have overheated. I had been driving. We got out of the car to take a look at the engine. The heat was like nothing I had experienced. I could hardly breathe, the hot air was choking me. I reached down to open the hood and flinched as I touched the scorching body of the car. Mike pushed me aside, covering his hand with his t-shirt to push the lid up. We stared into the engine, each of us trying to pretend we had any clue what to do. Any ideas? Said Robert, frowning at the steaming metal. I guess we just leave it to cool down. Mike, looking far more calm than I felt. Cool down was not a thing that was going to happen anytime soon. I took a sip of the last few gulps of water I had left. It was already unpleasantly warm, and my mouth was dry again as soon as I swallowed. Anyone got any signal? I looked at my phone, no bars. The others the same. Can we at least sit somewhere shady while we wait? Jay said, in principle a good idea, but there was no shade. I had never been anywhere with so little plant life. I could see for miles, flat desiccated ground eventually giving way to mountains, all of it empty of any life. How does anything survive here? I asked as we tried to huddle in the meager shade provided by the car. I don't think that kind of talk is helpful, Sarah. Mike frowned at me. How about we play a game to pass the time? Robert got a pack of cards from the trunk and dealt a hand of 5-card draw. We played for a while but fizzled out as each of us ran out of energy to fight the heat. My strength was sapped. I didn't think I could manage to drive even if the car would start. Within 2 hours our carefully conserved water had run out. Can you try again? Jay snapped. I turned the key yet another time, and the engine barely even stuttered. The seriousness of the situation had dawned on us all by now. We hadn't seen or heard another car since we stopped, not a bar of phone signal between us, and no energy to walk more than a few yards in this heat. Maybe if we make it tonight. Mike, ever the optimist. It might be cool enough to make it to the nearest town, or a hotel or something. I didn't feel like I would make it that long. I had sweated out every drop of water I had drank and still I was warmer than I'd ever been, my skin prickling as I tried to fan myself with a leaflet for a Vegas show. I see someone. Robert pointed into the distance. I squinted, only seeing a wavy heat haze on the horizon. Then my view focused and I saw he was right. A man was walking slowly towards us over the dry ground. Hey! Help! We need help! We screamed and shouted and waved, desperate to get his attention. He continued towards us, making no reply. As he got closer, the rush of adrenaline I'd had when we first noticed him started to wear off. Something felt off about this guy. He was out for a stroll in this heat. He seemed to glide across the desert ground, not a care in the world, and yet here we were feeling like we were going to die just from sitting out here. And there was something else off too. He's wearing a 3-piece suit. The words burst from me as soon as I noticed. The others looked. What the hell? We shared a glance. You all see it too, right? I had to check it wasn't a mirage, or the heat driving me mad. They nodded, looking at the stranger as he continued to approach us. Nothing to do but wait though, so we sat back down in the shadow of the car and watched the man. It took him about half an hour to reach us. He took off the old-fashioned fedora he'd been wearing and nodded politely at us. Well, hi there. You all look to be in some trouble. His accent was like someone in a movie from the 1940s, slick and polished. He smiled inscrutably at me. Yes, we are, our car, Jaya desperately tried to explain. Can you help us? Mike asked. We need a tow, or maybe a mechanic. Oh, I can get you out of here. The stranger answered in the same calm tone. We all slumped in relief. I waited for him to pull out a phone, or direct us to a nearby gas station. He just smiled. Does your phone work here? Or, he cut Robert off with a wave of his hand. I can get you out of here. But you have to do something for me. He met my eyes. Great, I thought. We can be saved, but by some creepy pervert. He furrowed his brow. Nothing like that, Sarah. What do you take me for? How did you dash? The question died on my lips. I didn't want to know. Something was very wrong here. Something for me, something for you, that's all. A simple exchange. You'll find yourselves at an air-conditioned hotel, with a working car full of gas, if one of you just signs this contract for me. He brandished a paper. It was technical legal language, but at the bottom it clarified itself. Your soul? Mike laughed. Come on, man, that's not even real. Well, if you don't believe in it, may as well sign. His shrewd eyes met Mike's, who stopped laughing with a wheeze. Are you the devil? Jaya asked, her lips trembling. You humans have had many words for me. He smiled at her almost sympathetically, but maintaining his detachment from our desperation. I'm not signing, Jaya said to the rest of us. No way. Well, if one of us doesn't, we all die out here. Robert was right, someone had to. Sarah was driving, this is all her fault. Jaya rounded on me. Mike was the one who said don't bother, we'll see another gas station. I did not want to sign that contract, we were all to blame. Guys, don't, it's what he wants. Robert was the voice of reason, but it didn't help. Screw you, Sarah, the driver is the responsible one. Mike joined Jaya, glaring at me. Leave her alone, Mike. You've been useless for this whole trip, you owe us all money, maybe don't point fingers. Robert was dragged into the argument and now we were all at it. The man stood off to the side, still smiling slightly as he watched tow, bringing money into it. Typical. Like you said, someone needs to sign. Maybe you need to step up. Mike glowered at Robert. He was a head taller, his muscles bulging out of his t-shirt. No, you were right. Robert backed down. Sarah was driving, it's on her. The three of them, united, looked at me. Come on, Sarah. Jaya fixed a saccharine smile on me. You'll be saving us, making up for your mistakes. No, Mike simplified things by picking me up and placing me in front of the man. She'll sign. Won't you? My friends glared at me. The man held out a fountain pen and the contract. The sun beat down, hotter than ever before. I couldn't think of anything to say, any way out of this. I thought of that air-conditioned hotel waiting for us, the safety of civilization. I took the pen. Hand shaking, I signed the contract. The world went black and I fainted away. When I woke up, I was lying in a double bed. The air was cool, I could think clearly again. A bottle of water stood on the table next to me, beads of condensation on the outside. I drank deeply. A knock at my door. It was Jaya. We're going down to the pool to cool off some more, want to come? She struggled to meet my eyes. Hey, Sarah. We're all really grateful for what you did. We're safe now, that's all that matters. And you don't believe he really was the devil, do you? No, I guess not. I didn't know what to believe. I was so relieved we were all okay, happy to be out of that heat, that it all seemed like a bad dream. We finished the road trip early and headed our separate ways after some awkward goodbyes. I suppose after an experience like that a friendship struggles to last. I found my seat on the plane and settled in, hoping for a quiet flight. Excuse me, I think that's my seat. A man trying to get past me. I looked up. It was him, the man from the desert. He sat down and smiled at me, that same slightly smug smile. Like he knew so much that I didn't. Hello again, Sarah. Don't worry, I'm not here to cash in on our little contract just yet. I couldn't reply. How could this be happening? I had convinced myself it had all been a dream at this point. I'm only checking in. Keeping my eye on you. I'll find just the right time. No need to worry, there's nothing you can do about it anyway. With that he sat back in his seat, quietly drumming his fingers on the armrest. After takeoff, I started to feel very sleepy, lightheaded like I had been when I signed the contract. My eyes closed and I missed the rest of the flight. I woke up as the plane landed. He wasn't sitting next to me anymore, wasn't anywhere as I left the plane. I haven't spoken to him since then, but I've seen him so many times. We pass on the street, he tips his hat to me. He's always wearing that same suit, the same dark brown fedora. He's at the bar when I'm on a date, sitting alone drinking a bourbon. He passes me in traffic, gliding past the other cars as though he controls them all. And today when I came home he was sitting on my doorstep. He looked me up and down as I approached. Not yet, he murmured with a small shake of his head. But soon. And then as always, he casually strolled off into the distance. Story 9, the day I invented time travel. There was no magnificent burst of lightning, no maniacal laughter. There was no audience cheering me on, or even a wife to give me a celebratory kiss. There was only a warm glass of scotch to commemorate my achievement. Today, my life's work had finally been completed. I successfully invented time travel. Let me preface my tale with some facts you'll need to know to truly grasp what it is to time travel. Most pressingly, and I'll be blunt, you cannot change the past from what was, and you can't change the future from what will be. Time travel merely grants a window to peer through to the past or future, a metaphorical pair of spectacles gifting the wearer knowledge. Not as fantastic as you once thought, eh? As an example, there's something philosophers and metaphysicists use to illustrate this point called the grandfather paradox. Let's say I travel back to the year 1940, before my father was born, and attempt to kill my grandfather. There will always be some serendipitous reason why I fail, because if my father fails to exist, then so do I. I can't both kill my grandfather, and exist. Imagine I walk up to my grandfather in 1940, and try to shoot him in the back of the head, point blank. Hell, let's say I tried 100 times. Maybe my gun will jam, or maybe he'll turn around and take the gun, or maybe he'll duck down to tie his shoes at the right time. You get the point. He needs to live, and nature will find a way, every single time. Okay, well now that the scene's set, I better get on with it. I don't have much time. My drive for my invention stemmed from a traumatic childhood experience in 2018. I was only 13 years old, 30 years younger than I am today. My otherwise light and colorful childhood was painted black by this warm August night. On Sunday, August 19, 2018, I killed someone. I was having a pretty typical night. I made myself some ramen, and watched Star Trek in the basement until it was time for bed. I didn't have many friends and Dad was working late. Around 10 p.m. I had went up to bed, and Dad still wasn't home. I imagine I fell asleep around 10:30 with my earphones plugged in listening to a no-sleep podcast. Sometime later, I woke up to a text from Dad saying, "Got held up at work. Be home in 30. Almost immediately after, I heard a rustling sound in the hall, then a hushed shutting of the bathroom door. I looked outside my window and didn't see Dad's car, and we didn't have a garage. My head flooded with questions. Where the hell was Dad? Was someone in my bathroom? With a near instinctual jolt of energy, I sprinted to my dad's safe, which was down the hall housing a .44 Magnum revolver. I saw him grab it once when our closest neighbor a mile down the road was burglarized, and I slyly noticed the entry code was the last 4 digits of his phone number, 4368. I opened the safe and grabbed the loaded gun and was outside the bathroom 30 seconds later. The light from the motion sensor nightlight spilled from the bathroom into my room. With the bravado instilling weapon in my hands, I questioned, "Dad? Is that you? I know someone's in there." After using 2 thumbs to cock back the hammer, I opened the door to see a bearded man in all black a bit taller than myself. He took a deep breath and with an epiphanous look on his face he said, "Oh my God. It was me. It always was me, and it always would have been me." After finishing his sentence he lurched forward with 2 outstretched hands, and I heard a bang echo throughout our small secluded farmhouse. The man fell to his knees, clutching his stomach. With blood leaking through his fingers, his eyes met mine and he muttered, "I was only curious, Nate." So I did the only thing you'd expect from a child in that situation. I slammed the bathroom door and began to cry. With my hands still burning from the heat of the revolver, I called my dad to outsource the problem. He picked up on the first ring. "Nate? What are you doing up? Are you okay?" In between sobs I finally got out, "Come home, Dad. I shot him, Dad, he's bleeding. He's going to die, Nate." "Nate. Stop talking. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Go lock yourself in the basement, and don't come out until I come and get you." So, I did just that. I went into the basement, put a pillow over my head, and ruminated on the night until I fell into a restless troubled sleep. I heard the lock on the basement bedroom door jiggle early the next morning, and my dad entered the room. He commanded me to never tell anyone what happened that night and to never bring it up again. I just had one question, that accompanied an insatiable sense of curiosity, so I asked my dad right then, "Dad, did he die?" My dad nodded his head yes with a near blank look on his face and left the room. We never spoke of that night ever again, but we both changed after that. I had so many unanswered questions. Who the hell was this guy? What did he mean, "It was always me"? Most importantly, how did he know to call me Nate? My name is Nathan, and everyone called me that except for my father. So this brings us to earlier today, before I time traveled. I knew there was only one way to truly find out what happened that night in 2018, and answer any of these questions, and I dedicated my entire life to making that possible. I didn't have any extravagant car-sized machine, just a watch with 5 dials and a Jeep's 1 dial for minute, 1 for hour, 1 for day, 1 for month, and finally 1 for year. With a quivering hand I entered my childhood address, and set the watch for 11 p.m., Sunday, August 19, 2018. I thought about this choice a lot. The timing had to be perfect. It had to be before my dad got home, before the man entered my house, and before younger me woke up. Fortunately, since I had no memory of running into my 43-year-old self as a kid, I must have succeeded, right? In addition, younger me had shot the man in the stomach. He would likely be lucid enough to answer any questions I could ask him. And, if I recall correctly, there would be a 10-minute gap between my younger self fleeing into the basement, and my father returning home from work to clean up this catastrophe. In the early 2010s, we used our house as a bed and breakfast to make some extra money, so we had a 3rd bedroom upstairs directly across from the bathroom with a peephole installed. I would go hide in there and observe the shooting, then emerge during my gap. With a diaphragmatically deep breath, I hit the red button on my watch's screen, and within a blink I was standing outside my old house, about 50 feet from my childhood front door. I had no idea about the health effects behind time travel, but shit did my head throb. It didn't matter. I had been planning this moment for my entire life. I slowly crept to the front door, hidden by the dancing shadows from the trees in the front yard. We always kept a spare key to the house underneath a pot on our front porch, and I reached for it immediately. With a level of stealth and care I didn't know I had, I slowly unlocked the door and gently pulled open the door and slipped into the house. I was greeted with an eerie familiarity. We had moved from the house later that year, and by God did everything seem smaller than I remember. I didn't have time to reminisce about the fruits of my childhood though. Driven by purpose, I slowly crept up the stairs to make my way to the guest room. Only when I reached for the handle, it wouldn't budge. I shook and shook and shook, and couldn't fucking believe it was locked. We never locked that thing. Could someone have been in there? Had my dad locked it to keep younger me out of there? Right after my plan's failure, I heard younger me stand up from his bed. I had to think quickly, but I wasn't going to bail now. I had come 30 years too far to turn around and give up now. My plan just needed a little bit unscripted action. So without a moment's hesitation, I tiptoed into the bathroom. I know what you're thinking, that's where the odd trespasser will be, but we had a walk-in closet and I didn't think the confrontation would happen for another couple minutes or so. However, once I got in there, the closet was full of mops, brooms, towels, and various supplies for the B my dad used to run. Fuck. With little delay, the motion sensor night light lit up and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Like clockwork, I heard a familiar semi-pubescent voice echo from the other side of the door. Dad? Is that you? I know someone's in there. I heard his hand reach for the door, and saw the knob shift, and the door opened towards me. Within seconds, I was looking into the eyes of my 2018 self. I saw him cock the hammer of the gun the size of his head and everything made sense. I had dreamt of hundreds of people it could have been that I shot that day, but my conscience's favorite answer was a burglar. He would have deserved his fate. In a way, this was everything I could have asked for. I knew the answer to every question I had ever asked. Now I just had to be the idle passenger and watch the nightmare unfold. I could only think of one thing to say, and it prepared itself as if it was the only sentence I had ever known. Oh my God. It was me. It always was me, and it always would have been me. Without a moment's contemplation, I played the part, and hurled myself at the boy. This is the second time I had heard the gun's explosive scream, but the first time I had felt the searing pain from the hole it had burned into my body. Just as I had remembered from 30 years prior, I fell to my knees and clutched my new abdominal indent. And for the last time, I felt existentially compelled to speak. I was only curious, Nate. Excuse the brevity of the wrap-up here, but I can feel the life force draining from me moment by moment, and I might only have a couple moments left. We're finally back up to normal time. It's 1:15 a.m., August 19, 2018. I'm currently in the cellar, bleeding out on the floor. Our dad dragged me to the cellar until he figured out a more permanent resting place for me. I only asked him for his iPhone so I could publish my night. He didn't say much, but I think he recognized his only son, and granted him his last dying wish. Now that I'm laying here, ruminating over tonight for the second time in my life, I'm realizing I could have tried this 100 times, and that door would have always been locked, or the closet might have been full, or something else, but I would have always been shot. Nature finds a way, every single time. Story 10, please stop buying Winston Red cigarettes. It happened just 10 hours ago and I am still shaken from the event that unfolded yesterday night. It was my friend's birthday party, and we all met at his house to have some drinks. It was a typical meeting. We talked about girls and played some drinking games. Being all guys in the party, the house was pretty boisterous and noisy, so I decided to get some peace and quiet, heading out to the front porch to have a smoke. Shortly after, one of my closer friends, Ray, joined me on the porch. I pulled out my Marlboro Black menthols while he took out his Winston Reds. I forgot to bring my lighter, so he helped light my cigarette, Godfather style. We sat down and chatted about how shit the party was, a pure sausage fest. I pulled a deep breath and let it go, seeing the smoke drift in the air, calming my soul as always. Ray kept trying to do the O-shaped smoke rings and failed miserably. I laughed at his antics, but he kept trying. I finished my cigarette and extinguished the ember. I looked towards Ray, and saw he had just finished his stick as well. He decided to pull out another one and started trying to perfect his smoke rings again. He looked pretty stupid, pouting his lips, and it kept me entertained for a while. But after he finished his second, he pulled out a third and a fourth. Then a fifth. He kept trying to make the rings. I felt something was wrong, so I tried to stop him. Yo Ray, I think that's enough, man. You wanna get cancer or something? I have to make the rings, or I cannot win. I asked him what he was trying to win, but he kept a straight face and kept trying to make smoke rings. He was on his 6th stick and he still couldn't manage to make one. He was visibly frustrated. I was quite worried as he usually smoked at most 3 to 4 sticks a day. I tried to take the cigarette away from him. Suddenly he got very aggressive. He shouted, "Back off, I have to win or they will find me." What in the world? I was so confused. Who was gonna find him? And win what? I decided that I had enough of his shit and stood up, wanting to head back into the house. Yes, I did it. I turned around, seeing a perfect smoke ring, and Ray was putting his head through it. The smoke ring seemed to tighten around his head, embracing his neck like a noose would in the gallows. Suddenly, Ray started choking. I panicked and tried to pull him. That only made the ring tighten around his neck faster. Ray threw his cigarette box at me and screamed, "You have to win. Don't let them get me. Please, please pull." He collapsed and went limp on the porch. Immediately I shouted for help, and a few of my friends came running. We called in an ambulance and Ray was shuttled to the nearest hospital. My friends and I decided to visit him today, but he wasn't in his original ward. The doctor told us he was in a bad condition, his trachea was burnt from the inside and his entire body was full of lesions, so they moved him to another ward which was more sterile where he was the only patient. We went to take a look. He was still sleeping, but he kept mumbling, "Win. Win. Win." His whole body was blood red. We shivered in disbelief. I don't know what to do. His Winston Reds are still in my pocket and I don't know what to do with them. I just saw an ingredient on the box that seemed pretty off. Rifetoro iris nose gam. Sounds French. I've emailed the company about it, but they haven't gotten back to me yet. I will let you guys know what it is when they reply, but please for the time being, don't buy this brand of cigarettes. Story 11, How do you sleep at night? I get a call in the middle of the night. Out of habit, I answer my phone. It's from a new client named Felix. "I heard you do renovations?" "Yeah," I answer. "But I'm on vacation right now. It's almost Christmas. I can schedule you after the holidays." "It's urgent," Felix pushes. "There's been delays at my cabin. The project has taken months. I'll double your asking price and cover lodging. I'm not making money by leaving the place empty this spring." My eyebrows raise. Money was always tempting this time of the year. "I don't know, man. I'm not sure if I could put together a crew. I'll triple my offer." There's silence on both ends. The money was good. I could have it done. "Fine. Send me your address." The cabin was located in a heavily dense forest, 6 hours outside the city. It was a rural part of town, infamous for attracting tourists with a yearning for the darker side of history. In World War II, a battle had taken place in the fields that resulted in my deaths. It had gotten so bad the locals said the grounds were stacked with bodies. We arrived late, after the sun had set, and the entire place was shrouded in darkness and odd shadows. I wasn't a superstitious man, but this place felt eerily. There was something about the trees. They were too long and slender like a corpse's fingers reaching for the skies. There was silence as we prepare to settle in. The men and I take our flashlights, gear and bags out. We'll be sleeping here while we worked. Felix's idea of lodging. We enter outside and we're immediately puzzled. Some of the renovations had been started, but unfinished. There were tools lying on the floor and hanging off cords as if they were left abruptly. The can of paint in the corner was still wet. I try several light switches. None of them work. Shit. Beds are upstairs. We'll start tomorrow. I call out. My employees shrug their shoulders and disperse, leaving me alone. I feel an unexpected shiver go down my spine. I reassure myself it's the cold and dampness in the air. I try to put up a good front, but the place was getting to me. It must be those damn trees outside and the silence. I head towards the stairs just as my phone vibrates inside my pocket. I nearly jump out of my boots. I have to remind myself to pull my shit together. "Hello? Everything still good?" Felix asks. The line is bad and crackly. "Yeah, I suppose," I reply. We'll have to start tomorrow. You didn't mention the power didn't work. Is that so? The last electrician said it was fine. And what are all these tools lying around? Did you have someone else start before us? I ask. Felix hesitates. You're actually the third company I hired. It's so cold out there, nobody wants to keep working. He gives off a forced laugh. I don't like it. Okay. If there's nothing else, I'll talk to you soon. I'm good. Felix replies. Good night. I trudge upstairs and pick an empty bed. I'm usually a fast and heavy sleeper, but tonight, it took me a while before I finally doze off. It must have been a couple of hours, but I was awoken up by whispers. Rapid, quiet ones. In my days, I wasn't sure if they're coming from my room or outside, but I shrug them off and go back to sleep. Yet the chattering continuing until I finally had enough. Irritated, I yell out. Hey, guys, we gotta work tomorrow. Keep it down. They immediately stop. Good. We need to sleep, do our job and leave this damn cabin. I'm just about to fall back asleep when I feel the bottom part of the mattress dip near my legs. Someone has chosen to sit down beside me. I didn't bother getting up knowing it's one of the guys, probably about to complain that it's too cold. Yeah? I mumble, eyes closed. He won't answer me. Just spit it out. I hear a mutter, but I don't know what the hell he's trying to say. Frustrated, I finally tilt my head up to look at him. In the dark, I make out a man staring back. He's hunched over leaning down at me. His eyes are blank. His expression emotionless. His uniform is covered in dirt and helmet tilts just off the side of his head. I come to realization there's a soldier on my bed with the bottom corner of his jaws blown off. He mumbles again, it's barely audible, but I understand him now. He's asking me a question. How do you sleep at night? I scream with horror and run out of the room, rampaging down the stairs, never looking back. Story 12, I can communicate with animals. Lately, they've all been saying the same thing. I first realized that I had a gift of sorts when I was 5 years old. For Christmas that year, my grandmother gifted me with a tiny, wriggling ball of black fluff, much to the dismay of my parents. I remember the palpable silence and the cold stares cast on my granny before my father finally commented, well, maybe the mutt will keep Morgan out of our hair for a change. The curly poodle pup, snuggled warm in my grandfather's flannel coat, peered at me with chocolate drop eyes, and in my head, I plainly heard the words, my name is Sonny. Wanna be friends? I of course was ecstatic to say the least. Having always loved animals, I finally had a dog to call my own, and I could actually communicate with her. It was a dream come true for a lonely little girl like me. Still to this day, I believe Sonny was one of the best teachers I've ever known, as well as one of the greatest things that ever happened to me during my early childhood. I learned from my four-legged friend many things: the customs of different species, how to speak politely to them, the histories of various creatures. Sonny taught me more than my selfish, drug-addicted parents ever could. She would warn me when she sensed the angry, hot scent seeping through the pores of my father, urging me to hide out in the forest surrounding our trailer, before Daddy took his frustrations out on me again. Several days before my dad passed from an overdose, Sonny confided in me that his insides reeked like that of rotting wood. On the night my mother, unbeknownst to me at the time, took her own life, my sweet puppy beckoned me into the bedroom closet before warning me to stay put until I heard the voices of my grandparents. After the deaths of Mom and Dad, Sonny and I went to live far out in the country with my grandma and grandpa. Life was good. There were horses, cattle, pigs, and a variety of other barnyard animals for me to spend my days conversing with. I also had the privilege of roaming the forest surrounding our farm, chatting with woodland critters such as squirrels and birds. I never worried much about getting caught. My grandparents simply thought I had an active imagination, and being an only child, the animals became like siblings to me. As far as I could tell, they never really acknowledged the many times I, in some way or another, foretold the future when it came to our feathered and furry friends. Looking back now, I assume they were simply too busy keeping the farm up and running and tending to a child that they didn't bring into this world. Still, they never seemed to question how I knew our paint mare Delilah would deliver a lethal white foal. They never batted an eye when I pleaded to bring the Muscovy duck pair inside the barn one night in order to save them from the jaws of a sly red fox. They seemingly never wondered how I knew that my best friend Sonny, far too young and yet riddled with an ugly cancer, would fall asleep in my arms one day and never wake up again. Her untimely death remains a sore spot for me even decades later as I type this to you all now. Continuing on, and many years passed. I grew up and put my special talent to good use. I attended 8 years at university, majoring of course in veterinary medicine, where I excelled and was always top of my class. I had the animals to thank for that, of course. You can learn a lot from textbooks, internships, etc. Being able to actually listen as an animal patient cites his or her symptoms allows for a much quicker and more accurate diagnosis, as you can imagine. After graduation, I worked several years at an already established clinic, paying off student loans, and helping out my elderly grandparents around the farm. Finally, in 2009, I opened my very own animal hospital. By this point, my beloved grandmother had passed on and my grandfather's health was rapidly declining. He spent the majority of his time in a lazy boy in front of the bay window facing our barnyard and subsequently my clinic as well. Sunny Day Animal Hospital, only a large, flat pasture full of rich fescue separating the building from the very home that I grew up in. In January of 2010, my grandpa, sitting in his favorite tattered recliner, was reunited with his dearly missed wife. His final words to me were, "I'm proud of you, Morgie." Time continued its march onward. I eventually married, had a couple kids, loved my job, and life was good once more. But recently, some things have been happening that I don't really know how to explain. Writing has never been my forte, but I'm going to try my best to describe the events of the last several weeks. It all started with Mo, a friendly spotted mule that had been a member of our family for over a decade. Once upon a time, Mo would be hitched to a rusted antique plow, cutting furrows in the soil and turning it over in preparation for the many seeds of my grandfather's garden. Now though, with arthritic joints and only partial hearing, Mo was simply a pasture ornament, easy living like most retirees. While brushing him one morning before the clinic opened up, Mo turned his icy blue eyes towards the clouds and proclaimed, "Something bad is coming." I patted his slightly curved back while prying for more details, but mules are often stubborn, and in this case, Mo was no exception. Nonetheless, I felt goose pimples rising on my flesh. Out of the thousands of animals I had communicated with throughout my life, not once had I been told an outright lie by any of them. As I forged ahead with my morning routine of caring for the animals around the farmyard, everyone seemed eerily on edge. Priscilla, the ever-jovial Yorkshire Soho, instead of devouring her slop per usual, stood idly by the paddock gate. "Something bad is coming," she squeaked. Usually found hunting me see in the hay shade, Mittens the barn cat sat near a flower bed still as a picture and eyes glazed with fright. "Something bad is coming," she hissed. Even Ranger, my fearless shepherd mix, who, for the first time since I've owned him, appeared downright spooked. "Something bad is coming," he whined. Each and every single animal on the farm began repeating the phrase one by one, "Something bad is coming," before joining together in an unnatural chant. Finishing up feeding and watering my stock, I began to get frustrated. I had asked repeatedly just what in the hell they were all worked up about. I thought that maybe they had heard some music on my phone and just got a jingle of sorts stuck in their respective heads. Yes, this does happen to animals too, but the way the creatures had begun saying the same sentence in unison thoroughly freaked me out. I tried to reason with myself that they were all playing some huge prank on me, but this was getting somewhat cruel. I've never personally met an inherently cruel animal before, especially not these animals. Fed up, I mentally screamed, "Okay. You guys got me. Cut it out." Every critter in the entirety of the barnyard turned to low okay at me before hanging their heads and falling silent. It was the weirdest damn thing I had ever witnessed. And when I say something is weird, a lady that telepathically speaks to animals, trust me when I say it really is weird. After the strange incident with my pets, I headed next door to open up shop. It was 8 a.m. sharp. I was still pretty shook up from the whole ordeal as I made my way through the back of the clinic to our overnight holding area. On this particular morning I had two in-house patients. Buck, a German short-haired pointer who enjoyed the occasional tussle with a venomous snake, was located in the large kennel area. I always hated leaving Buck in the clinic building during his many stays. Usually, I would bring the overnighters across the pasture to my own home. Buck, however, was not very fond of my ranger and vocalized to me many times that he would actually prefer to remain at the hospital. Despite both animals being altered, they each considered themselves alpha males and did not prefer one another's company in the slightest. I called out, "How you doing, Bucky?" While willing myself to put the early morning's oddness in the past, I was horrified to, in return, hear those now dreaded words, "Something bad is coming." I quickly checked his vitals and prayed that my next patient would be a welcomed reprieve to this madness. You see, a little further down the hall in our wildlife quarantine sat an injured whitetail fawn. Her ears had been mutilated by an unknown predator and the local wildlife sanctuary brought her to our clinic to see if she could be saved. Now, it's a known fact amongst species that wild animals have a different language, if you will, versus that of domesticated pets. Though I was fortunate enough to understand both Buck and Bambi, original right? They could not communicate with one another using anything other than regular barks, growls, snorts, and bleats. Therefore, if the bizarre happenings were indeed some elaborate prank, little Bambi couldn't possibly be in on it. As I cautiously approached the plastic crate and peered inside, I was at first relieved to see that the little doe had made it through the night. Although she would still have to remain in quarantine for 9 more days as is our protocol with wildlife, I was glad to observe her eyes wide and significantly more alert than on intake. Any positivity I felt was short-lived, however. I anxiously asked, "How are you feeling, sweet one?" And as you probably guessed, Bambi peered at me through long black lashes before exclaiming, "Something bad is coming." At this point, I began thinking I was going insane. Down the hall, Buck joins Bambi in a chant. This is fucking impossible, I thought to myself. This would be like me joining in a spontaneous chorus word for fucking word with someone that speaks German. Confused and angry, I verbally shouted enough. And the animals piped down. I scuttled back up the hallway praying my small staff had not shown up in the lobby, heard my yell, and concluded that I had gone bonkers, and honestly maybe I had. None of this made any sense. I stopped off in the bathroom, splashing my face with frigid well water. While drying myself off and staring in the mirror, I realized something. The chants of Buck and Bambi had followed the same progression as the barnyard critters. One by one, they had each made that same god-awful statement, and once every single animal in the vicinity had spoken it, they all then joined together in a sickly sing-song call. I was beginning to feel nauseous, which is completely out of the ordinary for me. Ever had an anal gland rupture in your face? I haven't, even that in no way compared to the queasiness I was now feeling in the pit of my stomach. Maybe the animals were trying to tell me something but simply couldn't. Maybe that's why they gave up every time I responded in exasperation. I thought seriously about just taking the next day off, but it was birthing season, more importantly it was calving season in an agricultural community. I'd definitely be needed to help pull some babies. Cattle often have a difficult time giving birth, and if large calves aren't removed from their mothers soon after labor begins, both mama and baby are at risk of dying. Our town was chock full of dairies and meat farms. I had already successfully pulled 13 babies this season, and the season had really only just begun. So, perhaps foolishly, I stuck around at work trying my hardest not to speak directly with any of the patients that trickled in and out of the clinic that day. Sadly, the totality of live animals I examined uttered that same wretched phrase over and over again. New patients and ones I had known for years. Furry patients, feathered patients, scaled patients, and even one hairless patient. Domesticated and wild alike, they all repeated the same sentence before joining together in what can only be compared to a Gregorian chant. By closing time, I was drained in a way that I had never been before. After locking up the clinic, I walked across the pasture, all but wholly avoiding my menagerie. I refused to even look in the direction of any animal that was out grazing in the fading sun. Regardless, I took note of the fact that as I gradually approached, the critters were making sure to steer clear of me as well. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed my entire humble herd of rescued Red Angus steers huddling closely with Mo and Priscilla, all of them glaring at me in some type of distress, mouths gaping and completely silent. Around 9:30 that night, after supper and baths and story time and tucking the children into bed, I sat at the dining room table and dug a buzzing iPhone out of my work bag. I sighed heavily, realizing it was my emergency line, practically knowing this was going to be a carving situation since I had somehow been fortunate enough to avoid any during the workday. I answered with Dr. Haskell and heard a very familiar voice on the other line. Old Man Bonnet of the Bonnet family dairy 20 miles east, 2.5 of which are his driveway, tells me with the precision of a lifelong farmer that one of his largest producing heifers has a baby in breech. After giving Mr. Bonnet an ETA, I double-checked the supplies in my work truck and headed towards the dairy. Upon arriving at Bonnet Farm, I made sure not to speak to any of the 300-plus head of Holstein Friesians that called this place home. I was doing pretty well under the circumstances until elbow deep inside a black and white cow called Gertrude, I made the mistake of mentally saying to her, "Push mama." God, I didn't mean to, it had just become like second nature to me. Gertie stopped right in the middle of giving birth before turning to me and bellowing, "Something bad is coming." She then abruptly dropped dead at my feet. I fought to save the baby despite being so fucking disturbed that I wanted to run as far away as humanly possible. He was unfortunately met with the same fate as his mother. Removing my shoulder-length ob gloves, I apologized to Mr. Bonnet. He patted me on the back and told me he knew that I gave it my all. I began packing my supplies into buckets to be sanitized when I heard that fucking sentence. God no. This could not be happening. One by one, the heifers in the barn started to speak. Something bad is coming. Something bad is coming. I sprinted to my vehicle screaming on the inside, "No, stop please." As those cursed fucking words continued on, quickly moving to the herds outside in the paddocks. I cranked up my truck and hauled ass down the extremely long driveway, all the while just over and over that fucking sentence. The faster I drove, the faster all 300 or so head of cattle spoke, until it was almost as if one sentence began before the previous one even ended. I made it out of range of the heifers just as they all began to chant with one another. I sped 30 miles over the speed limit the entire way home. Discarding my soiled uniform in the mudroom, I messaged my senior vet tech and advised her that I would not be returning to work the following day. Made up some excuse about being sick. I took an Ambassadorian and prayed that things would be different in the morning. Drifting off to my drug-induced sleep, I distinctly remember hearing the sound of our household pets chanting. At 8:30 the next morning, I awoke to a loud and fast-paced knocking on the door along with that goddamn chanting. It must have went on all night. "It's too early for this bullshit," I grumbled, and the animals hushed. The knocking, however, intensified. I clumsily rushed downstairs to find Val, my vet tech. She was visibly shaken. After rubbing my eyes and urging her to calm down a bit, she explained to me that the clinic had had multiple calls already of seemingly healthy pregnant animals just flat out dropping dead. Only 30 minutes after opening, 15 different people had phoned in with concerns and 3 people had shown up with the actual proof. Val apologized for disturbing me while all but whispering I just didn't know what to tell the owners. I don't know what's going on. Well, that makes fucking 2 of us, I thought to myself. I assured Val that I would be over shortly and put on my scrubs. 2 hours past official closing time, I had lost track of the number of cases. My uniform was covered in blood and sinew. I'd spent hours inside of people's dead pregnant pets and I hadn't found a single cause to this fucking madness. It was as if every single patient had spontaneously aborted before dying of shock. At the time when needed explanations or words of wisdom the most, the animals couldn't or wouldn't give me any damn thing to go off of except for those 4 terrifying words, "Something bad is coming." My once greatest gift had evidently become my biggest curse. 2 weeks pass and it seems as though any and every pregnant animal in our entire town has died from unknown causes. An article is even written in the front page of the town gazette. I never felt more unqualified as a veterinarian than I did whilst giving an interview to that journalist. Not having the slightest clue what was going on, the best I could think to do was strongly encourage townsfolk to stop breeding animals altogether. I offered and performed countless no-cost spays and neuters. By the middle of the second week since this shit began, many of the local meat and dairies had all but gone out of business. Decades-old farms finished in 2 weeks. Forced out of their lifelong professions by losing half or more of their stock. Things were beginning to scare even the most seasoned farmers, and they weren't alone. Hobby breeders of all types, even people with no pets at all, everyone was getting nervous. Town council held a meeting that was of no real use other than to inform us all that reports were coming in from Cersei, the city closest to us, that they've had an unusually large number of pregnant animals unexpectedly kicking the bucket. I had an idea the morning after our town meeting that I felt completely foolish for not thinking of sooner. Although I can apparently no longer talk to animals like I once could, there is one particular former patient of mine that can communicate with many folks. I phoned my old vet school friend Tabitha. She works at a very nice zoo about 2 hours away. After engaging of course about the situation in my town, as the news had begun to spread along with whatever the hell this disease is, if you can even call it that, I asked if I could possibly schedule an impromptu meeting with Jazzy. Jazzy is a brilliant female western lowland gorilla that has been taught ASL throughout her years in captivity. Tabitha surprised me by responding that any time would be acceptable as Jazz was 8 months pregnant and nearing her due date, so much so, that she was no longer available for public viewing at the zoo. Instead, she had her own private maternity ward within the internals of the park. I shuddered at the news of pregnancy but tried to remain as optimistic as possible considering Jazzy was essentially my last hope. I was desperate for any insight and terribly afraid that Jazz would be the only one able to provide such at this point. Pulling into the parking lot of Greenbrier Zoological Foundation, I prayed that this would result promisingly. Dr. Tabitha Bridgewall met me at the front gate. As we made our way to the maternity wing, she confided in me that they were very excited to have me here as Jazzy had been acting rather strangely in the last few weeks, had been signing words repeatedly, words like something and bad. The zoo staff was more than happy to have an additional veterinarian's opinion when it came to Jazz, considering how special she was to their conservation program and taking into account the recent happenings from neighboring towns. It was only an added benefit that Jazzy was no stranger to me. I had performed many a dental cleaning on her in the past. The pleasant old ape and I would often discuss the theory of evolution, but that's another story for another time. Tabitha followed me to the glass indoor enclosure as Jazzy emerged from her nest of branches and assorted flora. I signed hello and Jazz stared menacingly in my direction. Something bad is. No. God please. I screamed out loud, overtaking the gorilla's telepathy. Jazzy, the magnificent beast, took her final breath but not before pointing at me, bending her long arms at the elbows, and pulling her digits towards her body. Coming. It is now the beginning of the 3rd week since this shitshow began. I guess I should clarify that some names and locations have been changed. Not that it matters. You'll likely be hearing about this everywhere soon. It will be picked up by all of the national news outlets. There will be mass hysteria. Things are going to fall completely apart. I've quit my job. I'm staying at home with my children and husband, and I'm waiting. Looking down at my swollen belly, a local news alert scrolls across the television screen advising all pregnant women to be extremely cautious as the number of death reports continue to roll in. I rub my stomach gently and cry out, something bad is coming. I'm unnerved to hear a voice in return, a voice somewhere between that of a goat and a winged creature, a demonic voice, a voice being emitted from my very own body. I'm coming, mommy. I promise I won't be bad. Just let me live and I will show you. The animals were right, you guys. Story 13, sometimes, it's better to help. I awoke with a start, having the dream again. A thought I had shut out, a memory that was unwelcome. The dream carried pieces and fragments, a flaming sky and a bird leaving the earth, metaphors for what I had tried so successfully, for so long, to block out. I used to have them once a year, until Amy told me she was pregnant. Now, it comes every week. The more I think about it over my morning coffee, the more the aroma rises to my eyes, the more I breathe in the whiskey so carefully mixed, the more the fog clears. Enhancing, clarifying. I close my eyes and inhale, and I'm there, to the night of my dreams. Dinner that evening had been my choice, pizza and cake, to celebrate my 10th birthday. A brand new, second-hand boombox as a gift from my grandmother, a Nintendo cartridge without a box from my brother, a bookstore gift card from my stepmother, and $10 whole from my dad, with the stipulation that I not spend it on chips, because I was predisposed to buying chips, and eating the chips I bought and then complaining that I no longer had the chips. I went to bed that night feeling full and appreciated, but I knew somewhere in the deep recesses of my mind, that the birthday wouldn't really be over until I got a life lesson. Sometimes they came in the form of talks from my father, sometimes in the form of shouts, sometimes his breath hot, angry and low, and sometimes, just whispers as he stood outside my door thinking I couldn't hear him. Thinking I didn't know I was a disappointment. That I didn't know how I embarrassed him. That I had killed my mother, that I wasn't really his. 2 weeks ago, I'd had a life lesson when I let the cord from my lamp move too close to my bedside, how it became a hazard. Shoes on the stairs was another lesson. Letting my change drop behind the couch cushions, touching the thermostat, accidentally leaving the fridge door open, leaving whistle distance when playing outside. All lessons, all learned. Maybe would have helped if he put them in a book instead of as bruises on my arms since I was better reading and retaining. Danny said he was jealous, that Dad always treated me seriously, like I was an adult, that when Dad talked to him it was always upbeat, and peppy. I'd reminded Danny that his mom was my stepmom, so of course he was nicer to him, and that Dad treated me different because he thought somewhere in the back of his mind I wasn't his to begin with, just a chip vacuum who left his socks on the landing and didn't listen well. Birthday dinner was always prelude to the big birthday lesson, which always started at 1 in the morning and ended whenever. I tried to sleep as best I could, but I was pulled from my dream when his presence shook me awake. Only it wasn't my father standing over me. It was a stranger. I could barely make out his features under the hood of his jacket, but I knew my father didn't have a scar running down his chin. I knew that my father had all of his bottom teeth in place, that my father knew how to get blood out of clothing, and the stains on the shirt under the hoodie of the man standing over me told me that he didn't. He brought the Bowie knife up to his lips, shushing me and letting the blade rest against his skin. It nestled into his scar which started to seep. Sharp motherfucker. And I froze. There wasn't much I could do. I was 10, which technically was an entire year older than I was when I was 9, but I didn't feel bigger, I didn't feel stronger, and I didn't feel brave. I did what I could do, and I let out a quiet yelp. The man in the hoodie smiled politely, and brought the knife down, using the tip to snag the edge of the covers, pulling them around my torso and letting the fabric drop back down. What the hell? I heard my father say, darkening the doorway. The man in the hoodie held up a finger as if to say, just 1 second, to me, and then whipped around. Who the fuck? My father said, cocking a fist back, and driving it forward, catching the hooded man off guard. He tumbled to the floor. My father stepped over him, leaning down and looking at me. Are you okay? He asked. And I knew he didn't mean it. I knew he didn't care. On the night of my 10th birthday, his breath smelled like my coffee, and I knew. I knew he wasn't there for a pep talk. He was there for a lecture. School, as he would so fondly say before backhanding me, is in session. He stooped down and picked up the knife from the stranger, who lay unmoving, and touched the tip of it with his finger. Sharp, he muttered. I saw the gears turn behind his eyes. I saw the disappointment register faintly, dumbly, a look I was too familiar with, that I wasn't who he wanted me to be and I never would be. That I was a reminder of his past. That I wasn't even cute luggage he had to carry around, that I was me, and that was all the worse. The gears turned, and I could see him making the phone call. Someone broke into the house. Someone broke into the house and killed my son. My son is dead. Someone killed my son, but I got him. I got the son of a bitch. I got him and he's dead too. He broke in and I walked into my son's room. It was his birthday. It was his birthday and I wanted to tell him I loved him, officer. I wanted to tell him he was my pride and joy. I wanted to tell him how I felt, and he was already dead and I killed the man who killed him. I did it, but I was all too sure at this point. He would sob. I just want my son back. He brought his foot up onto the bed to hold me down and I saw the dove tattooed on the inside of his thigh. His foot pressed against my stomach, and he brought the tip of the knife down gently between my ribs. I love you, he said. All at once, he cried out, his body dropping to the ground. He screamed briefly, before the man in the hoodie brought his fist against my father's teeth, knocking his head against the wooden floor. The man stood, a second knife in his hand, and I saw blood on the floor from where he stabbed my father in the calf. The man in the hoodie drew up to his full height, his hair now spilling out from the shadow that held his eyes, and he stared at me for a few seconds, before turning to look at my father. He reached down, and grabbed my father by the front of his shirt and pulled him up with one arm. My father's head lolled lazily to one side, a small font of blood dripping from his nose. The man in the hoodie cocked his fist back again, and slammed it against my father's stomach, before dropping my father back onto the ground. I could hear him wheeze from beside the bed, but could not see him. The man in the hoodie eyed him curiously, before moving across my room to the footlocker at the end of my bed. He opened it, and began rifling around, looking for something with dogged determination. Quick as a bolt, my father shot to his feet, and charged at the man. At least, he tried. His foot caught on the lamp cord, too close to my bedside, and he tumbled to the ground, his head hitting the rail of my bed frame, a metallic ting, ringing out. I sat up in bed. The man in the hoodie stood, staring at my father. I stared at him too. His chest rose and fell, still breathing. The man in the hoodie looked at me, I looked at him, and we both looked back at my father. Blood had started to pool on the ground under his head, and I quickly took off my bedshirt and threw it over his face. He wasn't dead, but there was a sizable dent in his forehead. The man in the hoodie grabbed a sheet from my footlocker and moved over to my father, draping it over him, before tucking the edge under his left side, and flipping the body over and over until he made a burrito. He stood there for a moment, before retrieving his knife from the bed. He looked at me once, at my chest, and then sat by my feet, sheathing the Bowie knife at his side and his stiletto blade in his sock. The man on the hoodie did not move. Were you? You were going to hurt me, weren't you? I managed after a few moments. The man nodded. You were going to kill me? He hesitated, before nodding again. Are you still going to? I whispered. He shook his head. I asked before I knew what I was saying. Why not? The man moved over to the head of the bed and knelt. He reached up, and brushed the hair out of his own face, and then out of mine, before motioning to my chest, to the 4 straight lines with one line running diagonal through them, and another set of 4, that had been neatly etched into my body by my father. One for every year he wasn't sure I was his. One as a gift, every year for my birthday. One, every year, since I was an infant and my mother died in childbirth. I could see his eyes now, the man in the hoodie. There were no gears turning, he did not need to think. He understood. 9 scars running across my chest, and countless other invisible scars that would ask I put whiskey in my coffee and blot out my dreams for years and years. I remember his answer. I've remembered it always. Carried it with me like he carried my father's body out over his shoulder. My father never came back. I write this because Amy is pregnant and I'm scared. I'm scared, because for all the doubts my father had that I was really his, what if I was? What if I am my father's son? What if my legacy is one of pain, of anguish? What if all my son remembers of me is how my breath smelled, or some stupid fucking tattoo, or the tick marks I leave on his chest, one for every year, a fucking family tradition? What if, all I leave behind are scars? Because I'm not him. I have a choice. And I remember what the man in the hoodie said to me, when I asked, why not? Sometimes, the man said, his voice remarkably soft and high. It's better to help. Story 14, A Father's Plea. I tend to keep a lot to myself. Thoughts, opinions, even observations. I'm not very active on social media either, aside from posting the occasional picture of my family for the rest of the family and my friends to see. My family. All I have. A couple of weeks ago, my wife decided to take our 2 sons, newborn and a 15-month-old, and herself down to El Paso, Texas to visit her family. I hate being away from my family, but her extended loved ones haven't had the opportunity to meet our newborn baby. He's about 9 weeks now, so I figured a road trip with her aunt and uncle would be okay for them. I was right, they had no issues making the approximately 10-hour drive from Lewisville, Texas to El Paso. Everyone was happy to see them, which prompted me to warn my wife to be sure that she doesn't get stretched out too thin with everybody. She'll be taking care of 2 babies for a couple of weeks, and for any of you that don't know, that kind of responsibility takes a heavy toll. As for me, I'm at home. I couldn't get the time off of work, so I had to stay behind. The first thing everyone tells me, aren't you glad to have a break? No. My family is everything to me. My entire life revolves around them. Sure, I have more time to play video games, and maybe roll a joint up since there aren't any kids in the house. Yet none of that alleviates the feeling of loneliness, that emptiness that comes from waking up at 4 a.m. with no diaper to change, or no mouth to feed. It's hard for me to explain, except that I know it's just a primal instinct you oftentimes obtain by becoming a parent. So the other day, my wife texts me. She tells me she's going to finally get her braces off. It's not entirely important, but her former orthodontist closed down, so she hadn't been receiving attention to the braces for a little bit. I'm ecstatic. She had been wanting them off for a while, and I was just relieved that she found a way to do it. She wasn't on my insurance, and she doesn't work, so she determined she would go to a place back home where her parents could help her out. There was a catch though. The clinic, although based in the US in El Paso, performed many clinical procedures at an office in Juarez, Mexico. Ciudad Juarez is the city directly across the border from El Paso. If you've paid attention to international news, you might know that Juarez at one point was the murder capital of the world, due to the rampant drug cartel wars and corruption. A few years ago, that violence subsided, but this year it has come back in full swing. Naturally, I was hesitant to give her my approval. Yet, she reassured me that the clinic had a very direct route of transportation, and would take their patients in a marked van to the clinic. I read plenty of reviews on this orthodontist, and the vast majority of them were positive. I told her that it was up to her, but that it appeared to be a safe choice. Just don't take the kids. The morning of her appointment, I slept in. I woke up to a couple of missed calls, presumably before her appointment. I also saw a voicemail, "Hey babe, so my aunt isn't feeling well and isn't going to be able to watch the kids. I tried to get someone else to watch them, but no one can. My mom is coming with me, but we really don't have a choice but to take the babies." Okay, I mean she doesn't really have a choice. So I get on with my day. Make a late breakfast, turn on the Xbox and start up Netflix. As I'm running through my rewatch of Dexter, I anxiously await her call. I just want to make sure she gets home before I get high and hit up the video games. 2 episodes pass, and still no word. Maybe she's not getting service? Perhaps, but my iMessages to her showed as delivered, meaning her phone was on and receiving texts. It's 5 p.m. 6 hours have passed since she left for the appointment. At this point, I'm worried. My family is in a foreign country and I cannot make contact with them. I tried her mom's cell, but no answer. I call her stepdad, and he tells me that they haven't returned home and that no one has heard from them. As I'm about to call the El Paso police non-emergency number to go ahead and report them missing, I get a call from my wife. I answer it, mildly upset but for the most part relieved. Until I hear the voice on the other end of the phone. I have them. All of them. I have never listened to a more terrifying voice. Your family serves a purpose to me. Do not call the police, or I will kill them and send you the videos as I do so. Do not come looking for them. You will never find them. However, I will monitor your internet activity. I want to see what you do, how you go about saving your wife and kids. I enjoy this very much, so I hope you will too. The call ends. I do not know how to proceed, so this is how I will begin. This is my plea. I don't know who you are, and I do not pretend to understand what you are doing or why you are doing it. I'm assuming you know this is me, so I just ask that you read this and take it into consideration. I need them back. I know that I am 100% at your mercy, as are they, but I am here to reason with you. Without those beautiful people in my presence, I am not who I am meant to be. I know this isn't about money, because if it were, you would have asked for it by now. I don't know what this is about, but I want to know. I will do anything to get them back. Please, reach out to me, let's discuss this, and let's figure out what to do from there. Nevertheless, I will be forced to break your second rule. Story 15, Insanity Lake. My head was spinning with the rotation of my steering wheel, as I turned onto the gravel road. I was half asleep with no destination, despite the ticking clock only digging me deeper into the night and further away from home. The crunching of rocks under tires slowly came to a stop, a waterfront blocked the once never-ending road. A second wind came over me, the tingling in my toes telling me to get out of my car. I slowly exited and made my way to where gravel and sand meet. I tossed off my sandals, letting the soft sand squish under my feet. There was only one set of footprints on the beach, tracing my path from the car to the edge of the water. I was mesmerized by the beauty of this hidden cove. The lake glowed in the morning dusk air. The soft purr of waves splashing the shoreline rang in my ears. I let the water lick my toes. I could hear the clicking of bugs and croaking of toads. Aside from the nature around me, I don't feel alone here. The minute my feet touched the sand, I felt the heat of 100 eyes searing into my skin. The dissonance alone was enough to churn a pot of thoughts boiling over in my head. Do I continue exploring or let instinct guide me? Suddenly, I hear it, the soft humming of a woman's voice. She seemed unaware, or rather disinterested, in my presence. She was singing to a child in her arms, swaying her body back and forth to the tune. Without taking her eyes off of the child, she spoke to me. He died here, she said, in a voice low and painful. The silence following, cut through the crisp, morning air. Drowned. The ocean called him, as it calls you, as it called me long ago. I wasn't sure if it was just exhaustion, but the shadowy figure disintegrated, her face ingrained in my mind. She wore tan animal skins and bright body paint, definitely unfitting for this day and age. You're just tired, I thought. However, flashes of history flooded over me, like water over sand, images I'd never seen before. I imagined the ocean splitting, clearing a path of sand for me to walk on. I saw myself following the opening until I got to a large rock, once covered by the blanket of water. Visions of the baby giggling on this rock played over in my head. Then, a large wave of water ripped him from the stone and threw him under the current. The flashback panned over to the beach, where his mother hung from a tree. I felt her grief, watched her hope and liveliness drown with her son. I watched her take her own life, just days before her tribe paraded their horses over the land, hoofprints imprinting into wet sand. I saw a beach that swallows up anyone, and everyone, who stepped foot off of the gravel road. With a quick gasp of air, the visions disappear and I'm back in reality. The sand, once pristine and perfect, was now stamped with differing footprints. Pools of blood filled up the indentations, spreading until all the water that surrounded me was a deep, cherry wine. The sand began to swallow me up, starting with my feet, until the only thing I could swallow was sand. Her song was the only sound I could hear, as my footprints disappeared, a smooth surface of microscopic rocks replacing the beach. Another huff air, and I'm back in my car, clutching the steering wheel for dear life. The beach is nowhere to be seen. I figure I must have just pulled over and dozed off for a second. However, I couldn't seem to shake the beach from my mind. As I drove home, I contemplate the validity. Nothing justifies the actions, it must have been a dream. I got home, just before the sun reached the horizon. I jammed my key into the lock, and turned the door open. I felt an uneasiness in my chest, yet I slumped to my bed anyways. My morning slumber was restless, and when I finally give up, it was nearly noon. Welp, duty calls. I took off my dirty scrubs and replaced them with fresh ones. I made a cup of coffee and rushed out the door, so as to not be late. Luckily, all the lights were green and I saw the hospital ahead, with a whole 10 minutes to spare. However, it's like my hands were on autopilot, guiding me past the employee entrance. Green lights turned into back roads, that crumble into gravel. In the daylight, I can see just how uninhabited the streets are, as if the whole town has picked up and left. My boss called, but I let it ring and ring until she has no choice but to leave a voicemail. Suddenly, my tires screech to a stop, and my eyes widen, a waterfront blocking the once never-ending road. The tingling in my toes tells me to get out of my car. I slowly exit and make my way to where gravel and sand meet. Story 16, I didn't do it. I didn't do what they're saying I did. They say I'm a traitor. I didn't do it. I've managed to outrun them for now. I've hidden here for the last little while, and I think it's starting to calm down out there. They say I killed someone. I didn't. I mean, I'm pretty sure I didn't. I don't know. There was so much blood. There's shouting outside. Dogs too. I think I heard a gunshot. They're going now. It's getting quiet again. I hope they don't come back. They want to kill me. I didn't do what they are saying. I couldn't have. Could I? I mean, I was there, I think. It's difficult to remember. There was an argument, then a bang, then. What? Running? Hiding? Why? What happened? I remember the morning, the sun, then going into work. Wait, where do I work? I work in the city. I work in the city? Yeah, but what do I do? I remember a large grey building. Yes, that's where I work. Going in, past alert security, he still had a cold. I think I heard a truck go past. I'm not sure, it might have been the wind. Okay, so into work and then. That man in the suit, waiting at the elevator. I'd never seen him before. He looked odd somehow. Just not right. I think it was the suit. It was really well tailored. Yes, we got in the elevator, I pressed the button and then what? I remember the blood. Oh God, it was everywhere. It was all over the elevator. It was the guy in the suit. He was dead. He was dead. We just got on the elevator together, I turned around to press the button, I turned back and he was dead. What the fuck happened? But there was no blood on me. I didn't have any blood on me. I couldn't have killed him, because there was no blood on me, right? God, I don't know. Did I kill him? How? Why would I? I didn't even know him. I'd never seen him before in my life. Who was he? What is going on? There's shouting outside again. The dogs are getting closer. I can hear them coming. I think they know where I am. They're going to kill me. Please don't let them kill me. They're at the door, they know I'm here. I didn't do it. I'm not a killer. I didn't do it. I didn't do it. I'm Enoch. The preceding document was recovered from the body of Sub. 117/E7. Neuroactive nanometer implant, NMI, orally delivered via milk, successful connection with brain made within 25 minutes of ingestion. Subject successfully eliminated target with single pistol round, impacting head, within 3 seconds of implant activation. Death of target was from massive trauma to brain. Subject develops near-instant memory loss of events during implant activation. Some residual and collateral memory loss as expected, however no apparent effect on language, which is surprising. Brain showed no signs of lesions or hemorrhaging due to activation, an improvement on all previous subjects. Implant tracking system also worked, however as expected the skull of subject did cause problems in transmission, which resulted in a less than optimal neutralization time. Proceed with next round of testing. E8. Story 17, The Things We Do for Love. She slept soundly, the only noise in the room a soft snore that came every few minutes, almost like clockwork. I could watch her for hours, sometimes I do, just enjoying the view, all nudity covered by a silky, red sheet. Today, I was interrupted by a trumpet, her cell phone disrupting the most heavenly sound in the world. She slowly sat up, pulling the mask from her eyes and wiping the sleep from them. The room was pitch black, though it was just after 3 in the afternoon. She worked nights and slept during the day. She had a really good set of blackout curtains. As she answered the phone, she coughed, clearing her throat and forcing herself to sound awake. After a few minutes she nodded a few times, before vocalizing an answer. She hung up the phone and began to cry, her body shaking with the force of her sobs. I couldn't help but admire how beautiful she was, even when she was at her most devastated. Her sobs grew louder, until I could hear her through the walls and doors between our apartments. I muted my computer, wondering if I should go ask her what was wrong. We become close in the 3 years since she moved in across the hall. She had me help her install her new internet last year, which gave me the perfect opportunity to install the cameras I had been watching her through. I decided that we were close enough and she was loud enough that I could go over and ask what was wrong. I checked my clothes to ensure they were clean and ran a brush through my hair before I walked out the door, locking it. I knocked on her door right across the hall and she stopped crying. I heard her getting ready before rushing to the door, opening it slowly, peeking through the crack before pulling it all the way open. "Hey. Sorry, did you hear me? I hope I wasn't being too loud. I just got some bad news," she said with tears still drying on her face. "No, it's fine. I just wanted to check on you. It's been a few weeks since I've had time to stop by, so I wanted to see how you were doing anyways." I tried to make light of it, giving her a half smile and a shrug. It's kind of a long story." "Want to come in? I just opened a bottle and I'm gonna have a drink." She waved me inside and I followed obediently. She shut and locked the door behind us, walking to the kitchen. "Make yourself comfortable, throw something on the TV and sit down. Want anything? Whatever you're having, but only a small one. I have to finish a term paper tonight." She walked into the room, carrying 2 glasses. One was filled to the brim and the other was about half full. She handed me the one half full and took a long drink from hers. She sat down next to me, checking out the courtroom drama I'd put on. Ironic, I saw this episode the other day as I was getting ready to go in for my testing and it's playing again after I just got the results. The deaf woman has kidney failure and would rather die than go to prison. "I just wish I could live." She started to cry again, her body shaking. She took another drink, downing most of her glass. She motioned for me to drink, so I obeyed. She grabbed my glass and went to refill them, leaving me to stew on the bomb she just dropped. She was dying. She just got test results and they were not good. I needed to know more. She was the one thing I loved most in this world. I couldn't lose her. She came back and sat down next to me, handing me my drink. It was a different color and smelled much stronger than the last one she gave me. I gave her a questioning look and she took a big gulp of her full glass drink up. "It's a long story and a sad one." She finished her glass and set it on the table in front of us. I finished my drink and set it next to her glass. I gasped a little at the burn and winced at her. "What was that? Poison? You wish." She laughed a little, a melodic sound. "No, it was Everclear mixed with vodka and 2 sleeping pills. You're going to be couch locked soon. We have a lot to talk about." I struggled to stand, the room starting to spin. I fell to my knees, pushing myself back onto the couch, with her help. I looked at her, my eyes starting to glaze over. Then it was all black. I woke up tied to her bed, the clock read 11:07. I blinked a few times, trying to adjust my eyes to the darkness. I tried to scream but nothing came out. I noticed there was a piece of tape over my mouth and I began to panic. What had I gotten into? Time seemed to stand still, but it was only 15 minutes later when she opened the door and walked back in. Well, at first I wasn't sure if it was true or not. "A few nights after you installed my new internet, I felt someone watching me. eyes always on me. I suddenly didn't want to shower at home, I didn't want to sleep here, but everyone said it was irrational. I couldn't bring myself to sleep. I had to go to the doctor and get sleeping pills. That helped for a while. I could function again. Then 2 months ago, I heard a voice when I was coming home. My voice, coming from your apartment. I was shocked. How was that happening? I listened for a minute to make sure it was me, and it definitely was. So the next day when you went to do laundry, I snuck in and checked your computer. You should really keep a password on it. If you're going to keep videos of other people, you should certainly lock your door. If you're going to have pictures of your roommate in your bedroom as well, it's quite unbecoming. It seems you've got a bit of a crush on me, an obsession if you would. It will work out for both of us, I think. A mutually exclusive arrangement, if you will. The sleeping pills you caused me to take, they had a side effect. She picked up a glass and drank from it. She walked to me and held it to my face. I inhaled and smelled nothing. Water, I thought. The bitch was drinking water. They killed my kidneys, you see. I got that test result when the episode played last time, funny enough. This time, I got the test results that the blood sample I sent in would be a compatible match with me. I'm sorry to say that I took it from your bathroom when I was checking for proof that you were watching me. You should take your trash out more often that time of the month. She gave me a sour look. I tried to talk, but the tape over my mouth still stopped me. The mumbled noises made no sense, so she walked over and pulled it off roughly. I cried out in pain, tears forming from the feeling of losing the skin around my mouth. I'm sorry. Please forgive me, I'll do anything to make it up to you, I begged, hoping she'd take mercy on me. Of course you will. That's why you had me check with my doctor about your blood type. You left soon after I told you the results, went to your place and wrote a note. You deleted all the videos of me off your computer, took down all the pictures and threw them out a few streets over. You drew a warm bath, got in, and called the police. You told them your intention and then you made 2 deep, jagged twin lines down your arms. By the time they got there, it was too late to save you, but I should get a call sometime soon, letting me know that though my good friend is gone, she left behind the most generous gift in the world. 2 perfectly healthy kidneys. Story 18, The Sixes. My eyes opened and I once again felt the cold sweat clinging to my body. It was a familiar sensation that I felt even before the awakening. Always had trouble sleeping, even if I got a full night's rest I was still tired, my eyes always bloodshot with bags hanging beneath them. It also affected my mood greatly. Talking to me and not getting a sarcastic comment was a rare event. I slowly sat up and winced as I felt my body scream in protest, just go back to sleep. But I fought through the comfort of my sleeping bag and crawled out into the cool morning air of my home. My home was nothing more than an abandoned warehouse that I had taken residence in a little over a week ago. I chuckled as I once again thanked this place for giving me shelter from the terrors below. I was on the 4th floor and below my small camp was the sprawling streets of a desert city. Not too large, big enough for a Walmart and other large stores to set up shop. My ribs started to ache and I grabbed them to see if they were still sore. Lucky me, seemed like I wasn't completely healthy just yet. Well, I said to myself, it's sure as hell better than before, guess it isn't broken. I coughed and felt a shot of pain down my side. Even if it was getting better, it still hurt like hell. Could use with some more painkillers. I walked across the bare room to my backpack which held my clothes, food and medicine. I knelt down, pulled out my long-sleeve shirt and carefully pulled it over my head. The soft fabric clung to my sweaty skin, but I didn't really care, not like I had anyone to prove anything to. I moved around the various objects in my pack looking for my pills, scarf, food, water, ammo. Oh, here we are. I reached for the small bottle at the bottom of my bag but stopped when I saw a pair of goggles lying next to it. My food and water were getting pretty scarce. How long till he'd have to go out there and use those goggles? I pulled out the eyewear and inspected the homemade lenses. The metal mesh covering the eyepieces made them hard to see through, which was the point. When he wore them he could only see the outlines of objects, perfect when dealing with the things outside. At least, he hoped they were. He hadn't actually left the warehouse since the awakening, let alone encounter a 6. He peeked outside his window to the streets below, the black pavement illuminated by the morning glow of the sunrise. Across the city he could see many wisps of fog rising from the ground. They seemed like ghosts wandering the physical realm and haunting the living. I looked away. No need to worry about that just yet. For now he didn't have to worry about leaving. I could worry about that once I actually ran out of supplies. The next moment I put down the goggles and picking up the pill bottle. When I heard it I froze. A chill ran up my spine and the pain in my ribs became more pronounced. It wasn't what I heard, it's what I didn't hear. The sound I had grown accustomed to was gone. The sound of the bottle rattling was gone, leaving only the silence of an empty pill bottle. No, 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 I said as I opened the bottle, hoping against hope that I was wrong. The inside of the bottle confirmed what I already knew. I was out of painkillers. A shot of pain went through my ribs as the situation dawned on me. Damn it, I yelled, tossing the bottle across the room. Damn it, damn it, damn it. A scream came from outside, breaking me out of my tantrum. Keep your fucking voice down, I whispered to myself. You'll get through this, everything passes. Another shot of pain made me grab my side. I was no good like this. I looked at my goggles and chuckled. Looks like we're going shopping anyways. I picked up the eyewear and shook my head. I hope you work. After fighting through the pain I grabbed my binoculars and made my way painfully to the roof. Each step felt like a knife to my side, which would be more preferable than the actual injury's origin. But the past is the past and I couldn't do anything about it. When I made it to the roof it was much hotter than the cool inside of the warehouse. I reached to pull up my sleeves but stopped myself. No. I didn't need a reminder. Search for a pharmacy with binoculars was harder than it sounded. With so many buildings packed right next to each other it was damn near impossible to point out a single one and know it was a pharmacy. There was always Walmart, but that as well would be difficult seeing as the place would be overflowing with 6s. Come on, I muttered to myself, scanning the many street signs for the magic word. I'll take anything. Mom and pop store, clinic, fucking dilapidated crack house might work. Just give me something. Finally my eyes scanned across a rusted sign that read simply pharmacy. I laughed and pulled the binoculars away from my face. It wasn't far, maybe half a mile away, and lucky the street separating the warehouse and the store looked clear. No 6s blocking the way. Of course I wasn't leaving in the middle of the day. I'd be spotted instantly, and even if I had faith in the goggles I didn't know what the smoking bastard might try. I'd never seen how they acted when eye contact was impossible. I nodded to myself, looking at the store. Nightfall, wait till nightfall before running off. The ache in my ribs didn't like the sound of that, but they'd just have to deal with it. My ribs weren't running the show, I was. Plus I was tired of doing nothing all night. At least now I'd have an excuse for staying awake. With my plan mapped out I sat on the edge of the building before taking my last protein bar and fighting off the hunger clawing inside of me. In the distance I watched smoke rise into the air, probably another survivor cooking up a slab of meat, a thick chicken leg, a massive steak. My mouth watered as I chewed the dry protein bar. God, I missed real food. The rest of the day was uneventful. Since I was going out, decided to make a list of everything I needed. Not much of a surprise when it turned out I needed everything. It was a miracle a drifter like me had enough food and water to last him a week. Of course I had just robbed a place before the awakening, which was a small miracle. If I had gone out there before 6 days into the awakening I wouldn't have bothered hiding from the 6s. Anyways, I dumped out the contents of my bag so I could gather more while I was gone. I put on my red scarf as the chilly night air started slithering through the wind. As the sun set I waited next to the warehouse exit, waiting for my watch to go off and signal my departure. My pistol felt heavy in my hand. I've never been a gun guy, but when you're on the road you need to be safe. I had picked it off a guy in Texas. The man was passed out drunk with the revolver in his hand. I took it from him and used it to keep myself safe, but now was the first time I would have to use it. My watch went off. Time to go. I cracked the door open and looked down the street. It was dark. No light blue glows signaling the presence of a 6, but it was still smart to be cautious. I stepped outside and felt the cool night air of my skin. Shivering, I pulled the scarf over my nose and mouth before walking to my bike, which was just as I'd left it a week ago. After inspecting my surroundings, I pulled my bike upright and hopped on. In and out, Ethan, we don't wanna dance with our chances, we just need the supplies. The pain in my ribs were like constant gut punches which only made me pedal faster down the empty streets. It was silent, a sound that I had grown used to over the week, no cars honking, no music blaring, no people chatting. Only the emptiness left behind. It's like when you move out and when you go back to your old house and see your room is now bare and empty. Makes you miss the good old days. The pharmacy. I hopped off my bike and let it fall to the ground before sprinting inside. The dark building was filled to the brim with everything, not too surprising since there wasn't much looting after the awakening. You couldn't prepare for the sixes, they seemed harmless enough until day 6 hit. By then it was too late. I moved fast, tossing everything I saw into my pack: water, food, cigarettes, fucking soda, something I had been craving, and finally I made my way to the medical section. All the medicine was sitting quietly behind a steel cage. I let out a quiet sigh. Should have guessed that, Ethan. I weighed my options for a moment. The cage was held shut by a very shootable lock. One bullet and he could have the bitch open, yet guns were loud. A 6 would 100% hear it and sprint for the source. Yet by the time it got there I could be long gone with ribs that didn't feel like shit. After much mental debate I decided on shooting the lock, my shitty ribs being the driving factor in the debate. In and out, I told myself, half a second and you'll be gone. I pressed the barrel of the gun against the lock and took a deep breath. The muzzle flash lit up the air for half a second and a blasting sound echoed for a full 3 seconds before vanishing. I was frozen for a moment as the gunshot rang in my ears. It was louder than I thought. A scream in the distance broke my trance. I threw the cage open and grabbed as many painkillers as I could. Enough to last me 7 months. I smiled as I imagined the pain in my side being a distant memory before turning toward the exit and seeing a translucent figure slowly entering the building. I ducked behind an aisle, my heart hammering in my chest. Fuck. I felt the chill in the air grow in power. Ice started slithering up my boots and crunching under my weight. Slowly I put the goggles over my eyes and took a deep breath. Don't fight it. Just make it back to your bike and leave. You'll be fine as long as it doesn't see you. With those words of encouragement I turned the corner and found myself face to face with a 6. Fuck. I couldn't see much with the goggles on, which was the idea, but I did get the outline of it. At a glance you would have just seen a wisp of mist or fog, but if you looked closer you would see the tall being that it actually was. Its knees bent backwards, as did one arm. It had bulky arms that bent in directions that were unnatural. Its 3 taloned fingers on each hand clicked together in joy at its new prey. The body of the beast was spiky and mangled as if it had been dropped off a building. The face was the worst. From what I could tell it had no head. It was as if you put a face on a severed neck that could stretch and contort however it pleased. From what I could see it had no mouth or nose, only 2 multicolored eyes that shined like spotlights onto my pale skin. After looking in its eyes and not feeling a chill inside I chuckled. The goggles worked. The 6 tilted its head as it realized something was off. It studied my goggles and slowly reached to remove them from my face. I slapped its hand away, which was a big mistake. It let out a scream that made me grab my ears in pain. The 6 bellowed forward and snatched me up by my neck, holding me high in the air and reaching for my goggles. I tried to grab its hand only for my fingers to phase through it as if it was nothing more than mist. Fuck this, I choked out before lifting my pistol and firing into its chest. The bullet had the same effect as a plastic bag filled with tissue paper. At this point I was panicking, the fingers wrapped around the goggles. On a split-second decision I lifted the gun and fired into its right eye. That got its attention. It dropped me and stumbled backwards holding the injured eye. I hit the ground and gasped for breath before aiming at the 6. It backed away, blocking the door and dropping its hands, allowing me to see the damage I caused, or lack thereof. It looked completely undamaged. The only thing I had succeeded in doing was pissing it off. I looked at the aisles on my left and right. If I couldn't kill it, maybe I could trap it. I fired at it again, making another scream erupt. It shot forward and I smiled. That's it, come get me. When it was close enough I grabbed the aisle and brought it down on top of it. The six saw it coming and as it came down I watched the beast phase through the falling metal. The plan was now fucked and I had successfully killed myself for the sole reason of my side kinda hurting. In a last-ditch effort I started throwing anything I could find at the fucker, all of it just went through him effortlessly. Everything except the last item I threw. I tossed salt through the air and the moment the white powder touched its skin I saw black smoke erupt from its body. The six howled in pain and started shaking violently. This was my chance. I grabbed another container of salt and ran around the only standing aisle before sprinting for the door. The six walked through the metal shelves and blocked my way only to receive another cloud of salt to its face. I ducked under it as the demon yelled in pain. I was out the door and on the bike faster than even I thought possible. After getting back to my room I popped 2 painkillers, stripped and slithered into my sleeping bag. Tomorrow was coming and I'd need rest to face it. Story 19, Something Wants Me in the Lake. So, a bit of background, a few days ago, I moved to a new town for grad school, because the university I got my degree from didn't offer a library science program. This new university is about 100 miles away from my alma mater and I know absolutely nobody here. Fortunately, I had a couple good friends I graduated with drive down and help me get things set up. Let's call them by their American names, Craig and Anna. Craig and Anna had lived in the US since the start of the war in Ukraine and I met them on the international floor of my dorm, where I was an RA. Both were typically silent in larger groups, but after getting to know me, they became more relaxed, showing a type of warmth and love of fun that seemed different from the other Eastern Europeans on the floor. Over the next few years we became very close and I third-wheeled my way right through graduation. Having arrived a bit early to my new place, I decided to get them something to show I appreciated their help. I ran to the liquor store, picked up a 30-pack of the cheap beer we'd acclimated to in undergrad, and started browsing the shelves for some vodka. Eventually I spotted an interesting bottle. It had a completely blank white label stamped with simple, silver Cyrillic. In the bottom corner, a tiny Ukrainian flag with some more Cyrillic underneath it. I was sure they'd recognize it. As Craig says, if it's clear and it burns, I've tried it. Returning to my new place with the booze, I took advantage of the solitude to soak in where I'd be living. It's a creepy place, for sure. There's a shared stairway with 3 other units, 1 across the hall and 2 downstairs, all of them empty. Probably a good thing, because the stairs are in terrible condition. Each step creaks loudly and my late-night beer excursions would doubtlessly be an annoyance to neighbors. As for the unit itself, there's an exposed water heater in the kitchen, large scratches all over the hardwood floor, and several poorly patched holes in the walls. I could live with all of these things. I loved old places and didn't really believe in ghosts. My guests that night did, but I wasn't too worried for them either. Being from rural Ukraine, they have a relaxed, matter-of-fact conception of how to deal with the supernatural. Quite the contrast to the thrill-seeking variety of American believers I've known, all of whom seem giddy to plunge into a haunted house, but scared shitless if they see something. Craig was a little more superstitious than Anna, but I'd heard both of them talk about domestic spirits as if they were more an annoyance than anything. Shkidniki, Anna called them, pests. Plus, they had asked for the address well in advance of the move, not long after I had initially toured it and described how creepy it was. I knew they looked up all types of information about it before deciding to spend the night here. They preferred to err on the side of caution. This is where the lake comes in. When they showed up to my apartment, I floated the idea of going to a nearby lake to check it out, maybe go for a swim. It was hot and the AC was barely working, but Craig grimaced and refused point blank. He wouldn't explain why and seemed a bit embarrassed, perhaps because he's familiar with my skepticism. I left it at that while we got to work. We unloaded the truck, hung up curtains and paintings, got the large furniture arranged, and dripped sweat the whole time. I had almost forgotten about it until later, when we were all gathered around the kitchen table. The shitty beers and the vodka made me think of summers spent on the lakes as a teenager. I decided to bug him about it. "What's with the swimming thing, man? I asked, giving him a grin. He rolled his eyes, expecting to get shit, and looked to Anna for support. She smiled and said, "Tell him," in her quiet accent. Craig sighed and finished his beer. "The Nyavka." He said the word with a frown that warned away disrespect, so I paused and waited for him to explain. "The Nyavka," he began, drip drip dripping the last of the vodka into a shot glass, "are female spirits. Beautiful and naked female spirits that lure young men into lakes. Where I lived, it was said that the last 2 weeks of August were when they did this. Swimming was forbidden." I noticed Anna grinning more, but I pressed on, genuinely curious. "What do they do to the men?" "They drown them," he said gruffly as he gave an angry look to Anna, who was now blushing, "or tickle them." This was too much and Anna burst into laughter. It was contagious and I couldn't help but laugh as well. Craig rolled his eyes and took the shot. "It's a tale for horny young boys to make them fearful of thinking with their pricks," Anna said, still recovering. I raised my eyebrows and looked back to Craig. "Tickling?" He was angry, but in his jocular way. "It is not like normal tickling, they don't touch you. I don't know the better translation for it. You know the feeling when someone tickles you? The feeling in that place where you are being violated, how it is almost a tingling. A disarming thing almost like numbness? It is that, but all over. You do not laugh. It is torture, and you die all stiffened up." It was useless. He may as well have tickled Anna and I both to death for how much we were laughing. Drunk, I began miming something to the effect of having a seizure while grabbing a woman's ass when he sharply interrupted me. "They have no backs." There was a silence in the room. He was very serious now and I felt bad for taking it too far. The subject was dropped, Anna and I wiped the joyful tears from our eyes, and we all decided for lack of vodka we would go to bed. I watched my new bedroom ceiling spin in darkness as if I were falling down a hole, and I promptly fell asleep. The next day, wretched and dry as a bone, I stumbled out to the living room on my way to the kitchen for water. Anna and Craig were both awake and sitting on the edge of the fold-out. I said good morning and they were silent. Whatever. The call for water was punishing. I went to the kitchen and drank the entire Brita filter in successive tumblerfuls. It leaked from my lips and soaked my beard. It dripped onto my bare feet and I didn't care. I couldn't get enough of it. I must have been uniquely hungover. When I was done, I returned to the living room, bloated and cold. I sat on a chair facing them and asked what was up. Craig said after a pause, "Answer me honestly. Did you touch Anna last night while she was asleep?" "What the fuck? No." He breathed a sigh of relief. Craig was a man of strong beliefs and he believed in my word. Anna was slightly more thorough. "Not at all," she said, straight-faced and searching my eyes. "Not to try to wake me up or anything?" For such a quiet-voiced woman, she was intimidating, a product of that region, I guess. I repeated myself, "No." I went right to bed and didn't get up once. It was true. I would never betray a friend like that. She seemed satisfied and her face relaxed to a kind of mocking concern for me. I felt a hand grab my shoulder last night. Craig, excited both by Anna's corroboration and the shock on my otherwise skeptical American face, stood up and pointed at the window behind the fold-out. The tapping, too. There was tapping at this window like fingernails. I swear we both heard it. Anna's face confirmed the truth of this, but it was extremely unlikely. We were on the second floor and the door remained locked all night. The apartment, although decorated in terms of walls and furniture, was still filled with unopened boxes. There would have been some sign of entry. A path cleared, something. "Looks like you've got a schkidnike," Anna said. The remainder of the day was spent going out to eat with them and being regaled with details about how it couldn't have possibly been Craig's hand due to how he was sleeping, how Anna woke up on her stomach and saw both his hands before realizing what she felt. They believed me not only because of trust, but because she had turned around and seen nobody. I was still skeptical. Anna's less superstitious than Craig when it comes to more folkloric things, but they both strongly believed in these pests. I had never encountered anything supernatural, but I'd had issues with sleep paralysis. I knew the things a mind could produce on that precarious edge of consciousness. That was what terrified me. It happens most often to me in new environments as well. Eventually, time came to say our goodbyes. I hugged Anna in the light way you hug another man's wife, and she slipped me some sage as we parted. Do not worry about your little roommate. They are easier than roaches. Burn a little of this. I thanked her. Craig hugged me hard, patting me on the back. I hope you like your new place, friend. Oh, and you must send me a picture of that bottle. You've managed to find something I've never had. Very smooth. As they drove the 100 miles back home, my apartment felt very quiet, and although it was filled with a mountain of things yet to be packed, it felt empty. I lit the sage and was surprised by its familiar illicit smell. Almost like high school. I quickly snuffed it out. After this I retrieved the bottle so that I could take a picture of it for Craig. A finger of liquor swirled around the bottom. Strange, we always finish the bottle. Whatever, never question extra booze. I snapped the picture and sent it via text. Around this time the sun was setting and I began to get a bit nervous. Their anecdote from the night before bothered me. It had been so long since I'd been touched in bed in any way. If I so much as imagined it happening while alone, I'd probably jump out of my skin. This observation sent me down a bad path of fear, both the fear of the unreal specters of my friends' imaginations and the fear of that very real thing that had become the background static of my life, dying alone. I needed to distract myself if I ever wanted to sleep. I poured the remainder of the vodka into a tumbler with some orange juice and sat down with an old book. I admired the passages as I read them. Henry James, sober and dry enough to put the most fretful mind to sleep. A classmate in undergrad said reading James was like eating drywall, and although deep down I like his style, I've got to agree. Really, it was his way of forming a very realistic image that was his gift, not plot or even readability. The images tended to build on themselves and tap tap tap. I pretended it was nothing. Tried to push through the paragraph with my heart in my throat. The trouble with those paragraphs was their density. Had to start over from the top. There I was, one wet afternoon, nearly 4 months earlier than the occurrence lately narrated, this young. Tap tap tap. Fuck it, I thought. I put the book down and listened. It had to be explainable, but who could reach the window? My friends fucking around? I propped myself up and opened the blinds. Nothing but my own reflection and my messy apartment behind me. Tap tap tap. Behind me. It was a trick of acoustics. The noise was in my apartment. I shot up and walked to the center of the living room. The noise was too regular at this point. I heard it again, from the kitchen. I could almost time it now, and there it was again. I moved in quickly. This type of thing is like ripping off a band-aid. I waited. Tap tap tap. The water heater. Exposed in the corner of the room, there was nothing to muffle its metallic dripping. The American skeptic was victorious again. Time for bed. I finished the screwdriver, climbed beneath the covers, and dozed off. It felt like I only slept for a few minutes. I had an intensely vivid dream about being shrunk down to the size of a cockroach and washed down the kitchen sink. A woman stood over me, turning both handles open with all her strength, her features blurred to me by the rushing torrent. Potvorny malenkiish kidnik, she said in a loud, laughing voice. Somehow I understood her. Leish, nice viveti tahaniv. I woke up with my tongue glued to my mouth, my gums sticky. I had never been more thirsty in my life. I stumbled to the kitchen, the daylight streaking my blurred vision. I grabbed the Brita filter and drank straight from it, not even bothering with the tumbler. When I was done, I refilled it and drank again. Too impatient for it to go to the bottom chamber, I drank the unfiltered tap water straight from the top. It felt gritty with sediment. It's always been hard as fuck around here. I sat down in the living room, my stomach aching terribly from so much fluid. My mind raced with possibilities. I've suddenly become diabetic. No, the symptoms wouldn't be so severe so quickly. It must have been something that happened recently. The vodka is poisoned? Nobody else seemed to be as bothered by it, and besides, It wasn't nearly as bad the last time I drank it, and I was binge drinking then. Fuck, it must be medical, but I can't afford health insurance. Shit. In my frustrated state, I heard the tapping again, and so I called the landlord to complain. At least I could do something about that. Around 3 p.m., as I was finishing packing up in the kitchen, I heard the loud, hollow creak of someone moving up the stairs in the hallway. I answered the door just after they knocked. Maintenance, no, howdy. There were two of them, each in everyday flannels and carrying different toolboxes. The younger one in front was doing the talking. Maintenance. Hi, heard you coming. Here for the water heater? Yes sir, said the leader as they walked in. You're hearing popping? Something like that. Like water hitting metal. No leak, but it keeps happening. No leak could mean a sediment buildup. Happens a lot around here. The pair moved to a door by my closet and opened it to reveal the heater. What? Wait, that's not it, I said, the noise is coming from over here. I lead them into the kitchen. That thing hasn't worked in years. Those pipes go nowhere. It was the older one talking now. Wanted to get rid of the thing years ago, but the owners are all about keeping them aesthetic. I had been successfully marketed to as a hipster. The thing did look cool. Maybe you're just hearing it pop from the temperature or something, the younger one said. We'll check your other one for you anyway. There was nothing wrong with it. They gave some explanation about the broken one settling and told me not to worry about it. The working one was fine, so no sweat, right? At around 9 p.m., I had packed away all of the kitchen materials and gotten the living room organized. The only thing left was to take the several miscellaneous boxes in my bedroom and find a home for their contents. I'd earned a beer run. I locked up, half-jogged down the creaky steps and exited the building to the parking lot. My lonely black car was waiting in the only filled space. I decided to drive a bit further than I needed so that I could stop at a gas station by the lake. The liquor stores close at 9 in my state. The 7-Eleven parking lot overlooked the water from the top of a hill. It was underwhelming, muddy, empty, larger than expected. It was about like every lake I had seen in this shitty part of the country. Maybe it would be more impressive in the daytime. I threw open the trunk, spent some time pushing beach towels and swimming trunks around, threw in the 30 rack and then closed it. My eyes had just readjusted to the halogen glow of the gas station when I saw her. Out in the water not far from where the low moon casted its long reflection parallel to the shore, there was a woman standing waist deep among the wavelets, unmoving, facing me. She was naked and very pale. Raised with that Catholic guilt, I felt a compulsion to avert my eyes. I looked into the gas station and saw the cashier staring absently at her phone. It brought home a sense of reality. I looked back and the woman was gone. I was extremely nervous on the way home and didn't even play music. I pulled into the closest parking space and grabbed the beer. The light was still on in my little top right corner apartment, the blinds drawn so I could see my kitchen. I wasn't excited to go up there, so I cracked open a beer and sat on the hood to think. There was something off about a woman, other than being naked in a lake by herself. I'd noticed it right away. The light of the moon hit her from such a low angle, but she had no shadow, no reflection either. I stared into the kitchen window. From my angle, part of the view was obstructed by the fridge. I focused on it and my heart raced. I almost expected it, the shadow of a woman with messy hair gliding along the ceiling, a barely visible arm with wisps of black wavelets and curls laying limp over it just visible on the other side of the fridge. Stupid. A grown man drinking in a parking lot, waiting to see a ghost in his own window. Stupid, stupid. I grabbed the beer and creaked my way loudly up the stairs. I was inside for about 5 seconds before the tapping started again. I connected my phone to the Bluetooth speaker and maxed out the volume. Who's gonna complain? I started drinking with a fury, like I was out to prove something. I was parched for alcohol and couldn't get enough. Can after can after can on repeat. I wish I could say this was totally out of character for me, but anger drinking is a skill set I exceed in. At some point, time began flying by very quickly. Not unusual. I remember talking out loud to myself. Also not unusual. But then things started to get unreasonable. Among my recollections was the feeling of having my legs in water, my feet sinking in mud. As I was waking up, I felt the sand caked between my toes. I thought, did I swim last night? Did I drive? It was at this point that the dryness kicked in again. I thought, fuck it, at least now I have a reason, but then it got difficult to breathe. The walls of my throat were sticking together. In a panic, I stood up, immediately flung open the fridge and drank from the Brita filter. It was incredibly full, both top and bottom chambers. I must have been drunk when I filled it. It was also cold. Almost impossibly cold. I felt all the hairs on my body stand up. My skin tingled all over as I drank directly from the top chamber, filtered water mixing with the sediment rich for an odd, brackish taste, dulled with chill. It would have been almost pleasurable if it weren't for the pain. The intensity of whatever I was feeling. The water alone couldn't be doing this. I hesitated to move. I was worried I was having a seizure. Every part of my skin was under attack, contracting, paralyzed. I swore I felt fingers. Finally, I dropped the pitcher and the cheap plastic busted on the kitchen tile. Kitchen, right, but I was just in bed. I glanced to the spot where I had been sleeping. My comforter, my sheet, my pillow, my fitted sheet, were all laid out on the floor. The rest of the kitchen floor was littered with empty bottles. Glass bottles with white labels, each stamped with something in silver Cyrillic. I walked to the dining table and pulled out a chair. What the fuck had I done? How did I get so much vodka? How long had I been drunk? My phone still in my pocket. I pulled it out and had to brush away sand to check the time, 9:45 p.m. Same night. Tap 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 tap. I stared across the kitchen at the water heater. Not only was the sound coming faster now, the sounds were sharper, more forceful. Solid on metal, not liquid. Fingernails. Tap 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 tap. I stumbled my way out of the kitchen, tripping over bottles and my own feet. I rushed to the door and flung it open. I slammed it shut behind me, not even worrying about the lock, and stumbled downstairs. I think I fell. I must have fallen. Sometime after this, I was in a cell. Apparently the cops caught me gunning it and swerving. How much from booze? How much from fear? I don't know. I don't remember a damn thing. Spent a night in a tank, raving about the Nyedka, can't even remember the real name. Also kept calling all the guards and prisoners cockroaches. Some other things don't make sense either. Other than the brief period of near sobriety I had after waking up in the kitchen, it all goes back to darkness. I didn't plan on driving, I swear. I'm assuming I fell, but literally it was as if I ran down the stairs right into the jail cell. It was that instantaneous for me. And other things do make a kind of sense. Like them pulling me over as I was driving toward the lake. I just got back home today. The jailhouse still has my wallet and my belt until I can get them back tomorrow. The only reason I'm writing this is because I left my phone on the kitchen table. Everything is how I left it. Bedding is still on the floor, sand is still everywhere, and the Brita filter is busted by the fridge. It looks like the water attracted bugs. It's dried now, but there are a few dead beetles around. There are only two big differences. The 30-pack only has 3 empty cans next to it, and the empty bottles are completely gone. Does anyone know what's going on here? What's happening to me? I know I wasn't smart to drive. I'm not a smart person, but was I even drunk? The cops claim the breathalyzer was malfunctioning and kept showing an impossible amount. Enough to make blood flammable. I tried calling, texting, any type of contact with Anna and Craig, but can't get a response. I'd reach out to others, but I really have nobody else. Any help is appreciated. I don't want to hear that tapping again. Story 20, The Lighthouse. My name is Christian Turner and I'm currently stationed at the Saconnet Point Lighthouse due to a recent repair request. I am writing this log on my phone as I am unable to return to shore and I cannot seem to access the internet or make calls, which is unusual as I've done so a number of times at this location. I've been doing maintenance on lighthouses for almost 10 years now and am extremely familiar with most along the New England seaboard. Tonight was not only the first night that my cell phone lost connection at Saconnet, but also the first time in my entire career that I have been stranded. I had decided to respond to the maintenance request tonight even though it could have waited. I always have 14 hours to respond to this level of request, and could have gotten some sleep before responding. But I had hoped that I might end up with a clear day tomorrow if I wrapped this job up tonight. That hope was smashed once I corrected the issue with the lighting system and returned to find my skiff unresponsive. I spent an hour trying to get the engine started without luck. Then I repeatedly tried to call my boss Jack, also without luck. I tried to text, WhatsApp, Facebook or otherwise ping anyone until finally the sun began to set behind me. It was at this point that I realized I was in for a rough night. Jack would never realize that I was missing until tomorrow. Once 5 p.m. hit, Jack was always halfway into a bottle of his namesake. Tomorrow though. Tomorrow he would notice. He would check my computer and see the open ticket. Then they would come. I kept telling myself this as I headed back to the skiff to grab what remained of my stuff, mostly repair equipment but luckily also a few personal items that would come in handy. One of these was my Kindle. I began to read after settling into a corner. I read for maybe 2 hours as I became more aware of the storm's arrival. At first it was like a low unease, a queasy stomach threatening to make you move swiftly at any moment. It grew to a growl, then to a raging torrent of wind and salt water. Soon enough, as the lighthouse was pelted by a torrent of projectiles, the lightning began to flash. And once it did, the light in my station failed a second time and I was cast into darkness. For an hour amidst the absolute riot that the wind and rain were making against the windows, I tried to repair the systems. Once again without luck. I slammed the access panel closed, giving up, as I had exhausted all typical checks for failed systems. I made my way around to the eastern window and watched the unearthly madness spreading across the water before me. It was then that I saw her. It must have taken me several minutes to recognize and accept what I was seeing. I stared at the still figure. My mind began to flicker through possibilities for what the shape was, and how it could be where it was. At the end, my eyes had slowly passed from the top of her head to her feet until the shape of her little toes removed any question in my mind. There was a little girl, maybe 6 years old, standing on the rocks at the base of the lighthouse. Surrounded by ocean on all sides. She had dark hair, darker eyes and was completely unclothed. I could almost feel the stings on her skin as the rain pelted her little body. My body acted immediately. I cannot remember descending the staircase whatsoever. I was outside in a flash, but I slowed as I approached her from behind, visually tracing the twist and turn of her wet hair before the lightning. I tapped her shoulder softly as not to upset her. She turned and without meeting my eyes opened her arms. Even in this extreme situation, even with life and death at stake, I was very uncomfortable picking up this naked child. I did so anyway, holding her head against my shoulder as I ran back upstairs. As if to hide her from sight. So that no one would see a single middle-aged man carrying away an innocent child. As if Dateline has a helicopter poo above those dark clouds. I felt only slightly better once I had her upstairs wearing my t-shirt, socks, and flannel. That felt a bit more normal. Safe. She was cold but seemed to be breathing normally. She seemed calm but wholly present. She was not shivering. I had asked her to wiggle her fingers and toes, which made her giggle. All digits looked responsive and healthy. Then I asked her what her name was. She simply stared at me. The storm outside subsided and then returned even more forcefully. My head dropped from her gaze, unable to meet her eyes. It felt like deference at the time. It still does, sweetie. What is your name? I tried again, looking back up. Again she stared quietly, but then shot up as lightning struck violently to the east the storm. She screamed with glee as she pressed her face against the windows. I gently urged her back from the window. I tried to ask her name again, and ask her how she had gotten here. I asked if she was on a boat today. If she had been swimming. Anything I could think of. She shared nothing. She would only stare quietly or point at the windows exclaiming storm, the storm. I tried to explain to her that we would have to sleep here tonight and that tomorrow I would take her home. She seemed to understand. I did my best to soften the floor with my sweatshirt, and we used the space blanket in my emergency kit to keep us warm. Somehow, even with the hard floor punishing my hips and the cold from the concrete leaching into my side, I fell deeply asleep quite quickly after I heard the little girl's breathing change. I dreamt of thunder. Thunder that could topple stone walls. Thunder that would wipe suburban homes from their roots. And lightning. Lightning that scorched the earth for miles, that would turn animals from their burrows in flames. Hail that would tear flesh and freeze the breath right from your lungs. I awoke gasping for air. The room was glowing softly from the aftermath of a recent lightning flash, and I could see immediately that she was gone. She had been against my chest with my arm over her to keep her warm, and now she was nowhere to be seen. And there was nowhere she could possibly be. I shot up and peered through the window to see her, right back where I had found her. This time she was clothed in my now soaked shirt. This time she was doing moving. Her little hand was extended before her, making scooping motions toward her little chin. She was beckoning. My eyes raised and my head turned to see what she was calling upon. There was a Coast Guard cutter absolutely cruising towards us. Looking back, I think perhaps it was cruising to her. Not us. But in that moment I saw rescue. I saw warm blankets and a hotel. I saw the hamburger and fries that I had so sorely wanted for dinner. I watched as those hopes were dashed. They were dashed as the cutter failed to slow on approach. When it tore a solid third of its hull against the rocks to the northwest of East Island. I watched in shock as the lights at the tip of the mast dipped and were then submerged. It happened so fast. One moment I thought I had seen a flashlight on deck, and the next there was nothing left. Nothing. I won't say that I snapped. I did not. There was no violent reaction. No anger and blindness. But something did happen at that moment. I felt it. I think I even heard it. On autopilot I walked downstairs, sullen and sure. I carefully navigated the wet rocks until I reached her once again from behind. I stopped. I did not reach out. "Who are you?" I asked. This time with an unacceptable level of acceptance. She turned toward me. The lightning flashed behind her. The thunder shook her little toes. And her eyes met mine. "I told you. I am the storm." She smiled.